Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I heard the loud bang against the wood and felt a jolt of adrenaline shoot through my body. That gate never budges when there's the slightest breeze, so a noise like that always gets my attention. I remember standing in the living room gripping my phone and thinking, this isn't normal. That's how it all started. Now every time I hear the slam, I brace myself for what I might find outside. It's not a big yard, and that wooden gate is just a few steps from my back door. Still, I hate walking over to it late at night, especially when the latch always ends up undone. I don't see anyone coming or going, but something is definitely messing with my gate. I've replaced the latch twice, and I'm no idiot about how a piece of hardware should line up. It's locked down right, and it doesn't fail under normal conditions. Yet here I am, facing the same problem night after night. I remember the first time I noticed the latch undone. It was around midnight, and I was dozing off on the couch. I had the TV on, volume low, and I heard a sharp crack. My heart started pounding. I live alone, so I have to check these things myself. There was no wind that night. It was summer, the air was still, and I had all my windows open to catch any breeze that might blow in. But there was nothing. When I went to the back door, I tried to look through the glass pane. It was dark, though. I couldn't see much, just the outline of the fence and the big shape of my old wooden gate. It looked closed. Then I opened the door slowly, reached for the light switch on the outside fixture, and flicked it on. The gate was open. Not all the way, but enough that I could see the latch wasn't engaged. My heart sank a bit because I knew I had locked that thing earlier. I always do, especially at night. Yet it was undone. I walked up to the gate carefully, kind of holding my breath. I didn't know if someone was on the other side. My yard is fenced in, but the street is right beyond that fence. Anyone could be out there. I got close, put my hand on the gate, and felt the wood vibrating a little from the impact it must have had moments earlier. It wasn't swinging open in the wind, it just sat there, half open. I lifted the latch, tested it a few times, and it seemed fine. Solid, even. No cracks, no missing screws. I peered around the gate into the alley on the other side. No one. No signs of movement. Everything was quiet. For a second, I listened to my own breathing, which felt too loud in that silence. I closed the gate, made sure the latch clicked, and headed inside. I double-checked it 3 more times before going to bed. I thought maybe it was some fluke. Maybe it hadn't caught properly when I locked it earlier. I didn't want to think about anything else that night. The next morning, I examined the latch in daylight. I made sure it was aligned. I used a screwdriver to tighten all the screws. I yanked it back and forth. It felt solid. Even if someone tried to open it from the outside, they'd usually have to lift the latch. It's the kind of latch that doesn't just flip up on its own. I felt a small knot in my stomach when I realized how unlikely it was to pop open by itself. Still, I told myself it was a random glitch. A few nights later, I heard the noise again. This time it was around 2 in the morning. I shot upright in bed because it sounded like someone kicked the gate. The wood made a loud, hollow thud. My heart started racing, and I was short of breath. I forced myself to get out of bed and walk to the back door. My hands were trembling a bit. I tried to be quiet so I could hear if anyone was moving around out there. I didn't hear footsteps, no rustling, nothing. Then I clicked the outside light and I saw the gate slightly open, the latch not hooked. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The night air felt weirdly still again. I called out, "Hello?" My voice was quiet and shaky. I waited. No one answered. I walked up and grabbed the gate, looking out into the street. No one was there. I noticed the alley lamp casting a dull light, but no shadows. Everything looked empty. I shut the gate, latched it firmly, then tested it with some strong pulls. It stayed put. I walked away, but as soon as I got inside, I had the urge to check it once more. Still locked. I tried to sleep, but I was restless. My mind kept churning with questions. Was someone messing with me? Did I have a faulty latch even though it felt sturdy? I convinced myself to let it go until morning. The next day I went to the hardware store, bought a brand new latch of a different design and replaced the old one completely. I made sure this new latch was more secure. I tested it in every possible way. It was tight. I felt a bit of relief, figuring that would fix the problem. That fix lasted about a week. Then I heard the noise again. This time it was late in the evening, right after I turned the lights out in the living room. I was about to head to bed. That loud, shocking slam made me freeze. My neck and shoulders tightened. I stood there, trying to convince myself I imagined it. But then I realized there was no wind. The air was calm, and that gate doesn't just fling open on its own. I made myself walk to the back door. My legs felt heavy. When I hit the outside light, I saw exactly what I expected. The gate half open, latch undone. There was a chill on my arms and the back of my neck. I wanted to throw up for a moment. I was just so unsettled. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I went outside and looked for footprints or any signs of tampering. I keep the yard pretty tidy, so I figured I'd see shoe prints in the dirt if someone had come in. I didn't see anything obvious. The latch itself had no scratches or marks. It looked brand new, which it was. I closed the gate, locked it, and then walked around the perimeter of my yard. There are thick wooden fences on the sides, and the only entry is through that gate or through my house. I didn't find any evidence of forced entry. The gate didn't look like anyone had messed with it. I cursed under my breath, feeling a wave of frustration and nervous energy. I started losing sleep over this. I'd lie in bed waiting for the banging sound. Some nights it didn't happen. I'd drift off, only to wake up suddenly, thinking I heard something. I'd rush out of bed, check the gate, and find it locked. Then I'd stand there in the dark, my heart pounding, scanning the yard for movement. Nothing. Other nights I'd hear that unmistakable crash of wood on wood. It felt like someone was messing with my head, but I never saw a person. I never saw an animal. I never found footprints or claw marks. I triple-checked the latch every time. It was always undone when I got there. I started flicking the lights on and off at random times, hoping to catch whoever was doing it by surprise. That didn't help. The pattern continued. I decided to set up a small motion-activated camera by the back door, aimed right at the gate. It was a simple camera with infrared night vision. I placed it where no one would spot it right away. I tested it during the day, and it worked fine. Then I waited. For a few nights I got nothing but normal footage. Just me walking around or a stray cat passing by, and the gate stayed locked. Then one night I heard the slam. I bolted up from the couch, feeling that rush of dread. I went outside, found the gate half open, same as always. I took a breath, tried to stay calm, and checked the camera's memory card. I expected to see someone messing with the latch, but the footage showed the gate. Then, out of nowhere, the camera glitched for a second. The gate moved. The latch was suddenly open. It was like a blink in the video. No figure, no shape, just the gate going from closed to open. There was a short static burst on the footage, and that was it. I watched that clip so many times, I lost count. I tried to spot anything unusual, a shadow, a reflection, a corner of a hand. Nothing. It looked like the camera froze for a fraction of a second, and then the gate was open. It freaked me out. I told myself the camera was cheap, and maybe it just malfunctioned. But it was enough to make me anxious every time night fell. I started feeling jumpy in my own home. I tightened every screw on that new latch. I even added a secondary lock, the kind that you can slide through a metal ring on the gate post. So there were now two locks, the latch and a bolt. I figured that if anything managed to open both, it had to be human, or something that could manipulate the locks. I tested them both multiple times. I would rattle the gate, pull on it, push. It didn't budge. For a few days I felt better. Then, on a night that felt impossibly quiet, I heard an even louder slam. It sounded like the gate got ripped out of my fence. I jumped up so fast I felt dizzy for a second. I grabbed my flashlight, ran to the back door, and flicked the outside light on. Sure enough, the gate was slightly ajar. The regular latch was undone. The bolt was pulled out of the ring. It didn't look forced. The bolt was just laid on the gate as if someone had gently lifted it and placed it aside. I felt a rush of blood to my face. I stood there, mouth open, scanning the darkness for movement. Nothing. I stepped out slowly, shining my flashlight into every corner of the yard. I checked the ground for footprints. Nothing obvious. The gate felt normal in my hands, no cracks or chips. I slammed it shut and locked it again with both methods, my chest tight and my breath shaky. I started thinking about whether I should stay awake all night, sitting by the window with the lights off, waiting for something. But the idea of actually seeing whatever was doing this made me feel a deep sense of dread. I don't like admitting that. I've never considered myself a fearful person, but something about that gate opening without any visible cause just messes with my head. My pulse races when I think about walking out there and catching someone in the act. I tried sharing this with a friend. He offered to come by and help me stake out my backyard one night. We sat in the dark for a few hours, eyes on the gate. The air was dead still. Nothing moved. Around 2 a.m, we started getting restless. We both started yawning. By 3, we were half asleep, so we gave up. The gate never opened that night, but the following evening, when I was alone, the latch popped right open. That bang on the wood happened again, loud and sudden. I cursed and rushed outside. Same scene. No wind, no intruder, just the gate undone. I tried tying it shut with a length of thick rope. I wrapped it tightly, knotted it 3 times, and left it overnight. Around 1 a.m, I heard the bang again. I thought, impossible. I raced out. The rope was completely loosened and coiled on the ground like someone had untied it carefully. The latch was open. My heart hammered in my chest. My arms tingled. I felt exposed. I looked around with my flashlight, half expecting to see someone standing there in the shadows. No one. After that, I became more paranoid. I started checking doors and windows inside my house. Nothing was out of place. I had trouble sleeping. My appetite got worse. Every little noise made me jump. Even the creak of the old wood floors would make me tense up. I felt alone and watched, even though I had no proof anyone was targeting me. It could have been some unexplainable trick, but I couldn't deny how specific it was. The gate always ended up undone, even though I used different locks and ropes. I haven't caught anyone in the act. Most nights I sit up, flicking my eyes toward the back window. Sometimes I consider opening the door fast and running out, hoping to catch whatever it is. But there's a heavy feeling in my gut when I picture that scenario. I think about stepping outside and seeing something that shouldn't be there. That thought makes my skin crawl. I don't want to see something unnatural, but I also want this to stop. I can't move. Not right now. This is my place. I've put work into it. The fence is in good shape, and that gate isn't cheap or flimsy. I've had latches on gates my whole life, and none ever acted this way. I don't want to invite trouble by telling too many people about it. My friend already thinks I'm missing something obvious, like a loose hinge or a bad alignment, but I've ruled those out. I've replaced the hardware more than once. It's not the wind either. Some nights are dead calm, and it still happens. Whatever is messing with that latch doesn't care about the locks I install. Some nights when the latch stays put and I don't hear anything, I wonder if it's over. Then it happens again. That single crash, as if someone shoved the gate. It's never a slow creak. It's always a harsh, sudden impact. Every time my breathing speeds up. My chest hurts a bit from the surge of adrenaline. My palms sweat. Then I walk out there, legs tense, eyes darting around, expecting to see something. The gate is half open. The latch is out of place. Everything else is quiet. The neighbors never mention hearing anything, and I don't feel comfortable bringing it up again. It feels like a personal battle now. I'm at the point where I just lock it, tie it, bolt it, and pray I won't hear that sound. But it keeps happening. I don't know if it's a person, an animal, or something else. I can't imagine an animal lifting a bolt that carefully or untying a rope. And a person would leave some trace behind, right? Wouldn't they show up on camera even for a second? Maybe they're too fast. Or maybe the camera doesn't capture them for some reason. I sometimes think about what would happen if I ran out at the exact moment the latch popped. The thought sends a chill through my back. I picture myself grabbing that gate and ripping it open, shining my flashlight into the alley, looking for a figure. Would I see a neighbor messing with me? Would I see a drifter? Or would I see nothing at all? Until I figure it out, I guess I'll keep dealing with it. I've tried everything. New latch, new bolts, rope, camera. Nothing explains how it happens, I just know it does. Sometimes the nights stay quiet, sometimes they don't. And every time I hear that loud bang, my heart pounds, and I end up standing there, flashlight in hand, staring at that open gate. Something is coming in. I just don't know what. I don't like thinking about what I'd do if I caught it. The idea of facing it makes my skin prickle and my stomach tighten. I can't shake that feeling, even when I'm just talking about it. It's enough to make me leave that gate alone until morning sometimes. But I never really sleep when I do that. This is my life now. A simple wooden gate with a sturdy latch that pops open for no clear reason, letting something enter my yard. I still don't have answers, and I'm not sure I want them, but that's the story. I can't pretend it isn't happening. I can't pretend I'm not worried about what I might see if I surprise it one night. All I can do is keep my guard up and hope nothing else crosses that threshold. If I ever decide to catch it in the act, I'll have to face whatever's on the other side of that gate. And that possibility is the one thing that keeps me from sleeping at night. I never thought I'd feel unsafe in my own hallway. That changed the night I noticed a shadow outside my apartment door. It wasn't a passing silhouette. It was there, motionless, right at 11:13 p.m. I didn't see a person's face or hear footsteps. I just saw this dark shape through my peephole like someone was standing there pressing close to my door. Then, when I opened it, the hallway was empty. I live on the third floor of a building with narrow corridors and dim lights. The bulbs in the hallway never fully illuminate the space. They cast weak light that creates dark corners. When I first moved in, I thought it was a small quirk of an old building. Sometimes the light flickers, but it's usually stable enough to see. At night, though, everything looks different. Shadows seem to crawl along the walls, and there's always that stale smell that lingers in poorly ventilated places. My apartment's front door faces the middle of the hallway, so I can see a decent stretch in both directions through the peephole, but the image is always slightly distorted. It was during a late-night check that I saw something that didn't make sense. I remember the first time it happened. I was on my couch half dozing when I noticed the time on my TV, 11:13 p.m. The building was quiet. I heard the occasional creak from the floor above me, but that's normal. Suddenly, I felt uneasy. It was like I sensed someone outside just standing there. I got up, walked to my door, and put my eye to the peephole. I saw a shape. It didn't move. It looked like a person's outline, but with the weak hallway light, I couldn't see any features. My pulse sped up. I stood there holding my breath, trying to see if the shape would shift. After a few seconds, I decided to open the door. The moment I did, the corridor looked empty. There was no place for someone to hide so quickly. The hallway is just a narrow path with doors on both sides, maybe 7 or 8 apartments on this floor. I stepped out, glanced around, saw nothing, and felt foolish. But it happened again the next night. Same time. I was more alert this time. I turned off my living room lights, hoping the darkness inside would help me see better through the peephole. At exactly 11:13 p.m., I felt that same strange awareness. I moved slowly to the door. My palms started sweating and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Through the peephole, I saw the shape again. It was like a tall, dark outline, indistinct, but definitely there. My chest got tight and my heart pounded. I quietly unlocked the door, bracing myself to yank it open. I wanted to catch whoever was there off guard. I swung the door open quickly, stepping forward at the same time. But again, There was no one in the hallway. The lights flickered for a second, but aside from that, it was silent and empty. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the eye. Maybe a shadow from some outside light source was reflecting weirdly. But my gut told me there was more to it. I decided to make a plan for the following night. I set my phone alarm for 11:12 p.m. so I could get ready. I took my phone, set it to record video, and placed it with the camera lens against the peephole. I stood there watching the screen. For a few seconds, it showed the dim hallway. Then, right on schedule, something dark appeared. My heart rate shot up. On my phone screen, I could see the silhouette. It stayed for maybe a second. Then the screen went blurry, almost like the camera lost focus. When the image cleared, the corridor was empty. I stopped the recording and played it back. The video was normal until 11:13 p.m. And then there was a 1-second segment that looked like a black smudge. After that, it was just an empty hallway again. No clear figure, no proof of a person. I tried a few different angles and lighting the next night. I turned on my hall light, left my phone balanced on a small table near the door, and angled it toward the peephole. Same result. The footage showed a blur for about a second, then nothing. It was frustrating. I felt like something was messing with me. I started checking the entire hallway after the shape disappeared. I looked down the stairwell, peeked around corners. Nobody was around, at least nobody I could see. The building's security cameras only covered the lobby and outside entrances. There's nothing pointed at my hallway, so I couldn't ask for help from building management. After several nights of this, I began to feel tired all day. My routine changed because I was up late every night dealing with this thing. I stopped sleeping well. My head felt fuzzy and I jumped at every little noise. Each time 11 p.m. came around, I'd start getting tense. I'd make sure all my lights were off, that I was ready with my phone or even my laptop's camera. But every time, the same outcome. A dark shape through the peephole, a moment of blurred video, then nothing in the hallway. One night, around 11:10 p.m., I decided to stand in the corridor before it appeared. I stepped outside, leaving my door slightly ajar so I wouldn't lock myself out. The hallway smelled musty, like old carpeting and stale air. The lights hummed. I took a spot against the wall, opposite my door, and stared at the corridor. I kept checking my phone's clock. At 11:12 p.m., nothing seemed out of place. At 11:13 p.m., the light at the far end of the hallway flickered. I felt a sudden chill. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't see a person, but I felt like something was right next to me. My arms got goosebumps. I actually felt my eyes tearing up from the surge of fear. I held my ground for maybe 10 seconds, but that invisible pressure on my chest was too strong. I retreated into my apartment, slamming the door. Once inside, I leaned against the door, breathing hard. I felt sweat running down my back. I waited a few minutes, checked the peephole, and it was the same story, a dark shape, then it vanished. The next day, I talked to my neighbor across the hall. His name is Luis. He's in his late 30s, usually friendly, but always busy. I asked if he'd noticed anything weird around 11:13 p.m. He looked at me like I was asking a strange question. He said he's usually asleep by then and hasn't heard anything unusual. I tried to explain the shadow, but he just shrugged. He offered to check the hallway with me that night, but then he got a phone call and had to leave for work. I didn't push the issue. I tried asking another neighbor, an older woman who lives a few doors down. She just gave me a polite smile and said she hadn't noticed anything. I felt alone. Nobody else seemed to share my experience. I tried to ignore it one night. I turned off my phone, turned up the volume on my TV, and tried to distract myself. But I couldn't stop checking the clock. Around 11:10 p.m., my heart was already pounding. By 11:13 p.m., I couldn't resist. I turned off the TV and crept to the door. I looked through the peephole. The shape was already there. This time, I didn't open the door. I just watched. My breathing got shallow and my eyes started to burn from not blinking. The shape seemed to stay for longer than usual. I checked my watch. The minute hand moved. Another minute passed. Still, it stayed. I started shaking. My hands felt cold and my stomach churned. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound like a soft rasp against the door. It sent a shock through me. I yanked the door open. Again, the hallway was empty. My skin felt clammy, and I backed into my apartment, shutting the door with a loud bang. After that, the idea of catching it on camera became an obsession. I borrowed a friend's high-end camera with night vision capabilities. I thought maybe the phone camera wasn't sensitive enough to capture details. I set the new camera on a tripod in my living room, pointing it at the door. I left the door's security chain undone so I could whip it open faster. At 11 p.m., I got everything ready, made sure the memory card was set, and let the camera record. When 11:13 p.m. hit, I saw the shape through the peephole. I waited a few more seconds, feeling my pulse throbbing. Then I opened the door quickly, camera still rolling. The hallway was empty as usual. When I reviewed the footage, the hallway on film looked normal until the second I opened the door. Then there was a glitch, almost like static. The audio picked up the door opening, my breathing, and my footsteps outside. But visually, there was a 1-second distortion, and then it showed me standing in an empty hallway. No shape, no person, just me. I felt my hands shaking as I watched it. The presence was always just out of reach. I started dreading nightfall. Each day felt slow, and each night filled me with dread. I developed a habit of pacing around the living room, looking at the time and flipping lights on and off, trying to find a better vantage point. I even tested turning on every light in my apartment to see if that helped. It didn't. The shape appeared at 11:13 p.m., whether my apartment was lit up or dark. I considered staying with a friend, but I didn't want to leave my apartment in case something happened when I wasn't there. I kept thinking, maybe I could catch it if I tried hard enough. One evening, I decided to take a different approach. I turned off all the lights in my apartment and in the hallway. There's a switch by the stairwell for the corridor light. The building's management rarely wants tenants to touch that switch, but I did it anyway. The hallway went dark except for the faint glow from the exit sign near the stairs. I stood in my doorway holding a flashlight. At 11:12 p.m., I felt my heart hammering. Then, at 11:13 p.m., something made the temperature drop. I felt a cool breeze on my arms, but there were no open windows or fans. I switched on my flashlight and swept it across the hallway. The beam shook because my hand was trembling. It illuminated the worn carpet, the chipped paint on the walls, the old apartment doors. I saw nothing else, but I still felt that presence, like something was inches away. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to walk down the hallway, shining the light in every direction. No one was there. When I checked the time, it was 11:14 p.m., and the feeling was gone. I turned the corridor lights back on, locked myself in my apartment, and tried to calm down by drinking water. My hand was still shaking as I lifted the glass. 1 week later, the pattern hadn't changed. I almost got used to that nightly tension, like a ritual I couldn't skip. At 11:13 p.m., I'd check the peephole, see the shadow, then I'd open the door to find nothing. The filming never worked. The shape never showed up in my recordings, just a blur or a glitch. I got used to sleeping late and my mornings were slow. I felt worn down. My eyes were sunken, and I avoided talking to neighbors because I knew they'd think I was losing it. Even my coworker asked if I was feeling sick because I looked so tired and on edge. One night I decided to ignore it. I told myself, just don't look. Pretend it's not there. I put on noise-canceling headphones and watched random videos online. My chest felt tight, but I tried to ignore it. At 11:13 p.m., I noticed my apartment lights flicker even though I was trying not to pay attention. My TV show glitched for a moment. The tension in my chest got worse, like I couldn't breathe properly. Finally, I couldn't take it. I ripped off my headphones and dashed to the door. Before looking through the peephole, I heard a slight scraping sound outside. It was like something dragging across the corridor floor. My hands were shaking so much I could barely grab the doorknob. When I opened the door, everything was quiet. No marks on the floor, nothing in sight. Now I'm stuck in this loop. Every night at 11:13 p.m., I see it. I feel it. The presence never tries to enter my apartment. It just stands there. I can't get rid of it. I can't record it properly. And I don't know what it wants. I only know that each time it appears, my body reacts with fear. My muscles tighten, my pulse throbs, and I feel cold sweat on my forehead. I can't make sense of it, and I can't prove it's real to anyone else. Yesterday, I actually looked around for new apartments. I'm not sure if moving away would solve this problem, but I'm starting to think about it seriously. The idea of staying here, dealing with this presence every night, is wearing me down. I'm scared it might escalate. I don't know how or why, but the thought creeps into my mind every time I look at the clock at night. For now, I'm planning to stay up again, watch the door, maybe try a different kind of camera, or see if I can get a friend to spend the night here with me. But nobody is eager to come over so late to investigate some phantom shadow. I'm alone in this. I'm writing this now to clear my head, to lay out the facts in simple terms. There's a shape in my hallway at 11:13 p.m. It shows up on my peephole, stands there without making a sound, and disappears when I open the door. Any recording device catches only a blur or glitch. I've tried everything I can think of, and none of it has worked. The tension is constant, and my body is exhausted. I just hope that at some point this thing gets bored and moves on, or that I find the courage to leave this building behind. Because right now this ritual is becoming my life, and I hate it. I stand here each night, waiting, heart pounding, trying to outsmart a shadow that always seems one step ahead of me. I never expected to feel so unsettled inside my own bedroom. A few months ago, I noticed a strange brown stain on my ceiling. It looked small at first, so I assumed it was a water leak or something like that. I tried to ignore it, but it started changing shape in a weird way. The outline began to resemble a human figure. It messed with my head because I couldn't explain it. No pipes run over that part of the ceiling. No moisture, no cracks, nothing. And then it vanished after a few days. That should have been the end of it. But it came back. Now I can't help feeling this heavy atmosphere whenever I lie down in bed. I've had experts check it out, and they found nothing. It's probably not a leak. Could it be something else? Part of me doesn't want to believe it's paranormal, but I'm out of logical explanations. That thought keeps me up at night. I live in a small apartment on the top floor. I've been here for a couple of years. It's not fancy. The building is old, but it's sturdy. The walls are thick, and there's usually no noise from neighbors. My bedroom is pretty basic. A bed, a dresser, a nightstand with a small lamp, and a closet. There's one window that faces another building. Not much of a view. The ceiling is off-white with a few hairline cracks here and there. It used to look normal. But one morning I woke up and saw this weird brown stain near the center of the ceiling. It wasn't big, maybe the size of my hand, but it stood out against the lighter paint. I got up, turned on the light, and squinted at it. It just looked like a dull, irregular blotch. I thought, great, another home repair I can't afford. I figured it had to be water damage from somewhere above me, but I'm on the top floor and there's no apartment upstairs, just the roof. I didn't see any sign of water dripping. The paint wasn't peeling. I touched the ceiling with a broom handle, expecting it to feel soft or damp, but it felt solid. I shrugged it off and went on with my day. A few nights later, I was reading in bed. I set the book down and glanced up. The stain had become a bit bigger. Or maybe it was just my imagination. I stood on the bed to get a closer look. It seemed like the edges had stretched out. It wasn't shaped like a circle anymore. It looked more angular, almost like a person's outline. I stepped down, grabbed my phone, and took a picture. The color was this muddy brown, lighter in some spots, darker in others. I didn't see any texture that looked wet. I tried to push up against the ceiling with my palm, still dry and firm. I felt uneasy. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the paint was just discoloring. But the following days, I kept staring at that spot. I told a coworker about it. He said, maybe it was mold. I bought some mold cleaner, climbed on a chair, and tried to scrub it. Nothing came off. The surface felt normal. The stain didn't budge. It just stayed there, dull and brown, with that faint outline. Then one morning, it was gone. Just gone. The ceiling looked exactly like it used to, without any trace of brown. I was so relieved. I thought maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe something in the roof had caused a temporary patch of dampness that evaporated. I told myself not to think about it anymore. A few weeks later, I woke up in the middle of the night feeling this odd chill. My windows were closed, the heater was off, but the air felt heavy. It was hard to breathe. I switched on the lamp and looked around. The room seemed normal at first. Then I spotted something on the ceiling. My heart started thumping. That stain was back. It was bigger than before. This time I could clearly see a shape that looked like a torso and maybe shoulders. I felt my stomach twist. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I might be half asleep. But it was real. It had a distinct form, like a silhouette pressed into the paint. I turned on all the lights. I stood on my bed and my legs felt a bit shaky. I reached up and ran my fingers across the outline. It was cool to the touch, not warmer or colder than the rest of the ceiling, but it felt strange just knowing it was right above me. My mind raced. I stepped down and walked to the kitchen, trying to calm myself. I drank some water. My hands were trembling. After a few minutes, I forced myself to go back to bed. I kept the lights on. Eventually, I fell asleep out of pure exhaustion. The next day, I couldn't concentrate at work. I kept thinking about the stain. That evening, I called a plumber who specialized in leaks. He came over, used some detection device, checked all my pipes, turned on the faucets, flushed the toilet, everything. He said there was no evidence of any leak or moisture problem. He tested the walls, the ceiling, no trace of water. He shrugged and said maybe it was old paint. I asked him, "Have you ever seen something like this?" He said no, not exactly. He seemed puzzled, but he left without any answers. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I watched the stain. I don't know if it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark, but it seemed to expand when the lights were off. When I turned the lamp on, it looked smaller. I did this on and off for about an hour. Each time I flipped the light switch, I saw it go from larger to smaller. My chest felt tight. My mouth went dry. I had trouble swallowing. I couldn't deny something weird was happening. A few days later, the stain began to fade again. By the next morning, there was nothing there. The ceiling looked completely normal. I tried to relax. I even took a few photos when it was gone. No mark, no discoloration. It was like it never existed. But I couldn't shake the feeling of something lurking. That's when I started considering a paranormal explanation. I'm not a big believer in ghosts or spirits, but I couldn't think of anything else. The idea made my skin crawl, but it also gave me a strange sense of possibility. There had to be a reason for this. Then it happened for a third time. I was lying in bed, about to drift off, when I felt that same pressure in the air. It was like the room was thicker. My ears felt blocked. I turned on my side and looked at the ceiling. The stain was there again, right above me. It looked almost complete, like a full outline of a person. A head shape, broad shoulders, a slight taper where legs would be. No details, just a silhouette in muddy brown. My breath got shallow. I felt sweat on my forehead. My heart pounded in my chest. I pulled the covers up to my neck as if that would help. I stared at the shape and it seemed to pulse or shift gently. I turned on the lamp and it shrank a little. I started talking to it out loud. "What the hell are you? Why are you here?" I felt a little stupid, but I also felt desperate. I got out of bed and threw on some clothes. I left the apartment. It was past midnight. I drove around aimlessly for about 30 minutes just to get away. When I got back, I crept into my room. The stain was still there. I sat in the living room and fell asleep on the couch. In the morning, I checked the bedroom ceiling. It was smaller, but still there. I took more photos. I compared them on my phone to the old ones. It absolutely changed shape. It wasn't an illusion. I called a friend who's into weird stuff. He said he'd never heard of a haunted ceiling, but he believed me. He suggested I contact someone who deals with paranormal investigations, but that felt too extreme. I was nervous about having strangers in my apartment setting up equipment. Plus, I didn't even know if that would help. Over the next few nights, the stain kept changing size. It was always bigger when it was dark. During the day, or when I had the overhead light on, it shrank. I noticed that the feeling of heaviness came along with it every time. When it got bigger, I felt my chest tighten, and the air felt thick. Sometimes I heard a faint creaking sound, but I couldn't tell if it was the building settling or something else. I developed a pattern. I'd try to distract myself until I was exhausted. Then I'd turn off the lights and try to sleep. Whenever I caught a glimpse of that shape expanding, my heart rate would spike. I felt a pressure in my temples. My mind would race with questions. I kept thinking, is this a ghost? Is it just some phenomenon I don't understand? Is my ceiling rotting? Am I losing it? But every morning the shape was smaller again, like it was retreating from the daylight. After about 5 days of this, it vanished once more. I started noticing a cycle. It would appear for a few days, then disappear. Each time it came back, it seemed stronger. The outline got clearer, the presence felt heavier, and I couldn't rest. I'd snap awake at random hours, my pulse pounding. My blankets felt too warm, and I'd sweat through my pajamas. I got headaches. I kept checking the ceiling with a flashlight every few hours, even when it wasn't there. At work, I was distracted. My boss complained about my lack of focus. I didn't feel like explaining this whole ceiling story. People would think I was making it up or going nuts. I spent my lunch breaks on my phone, searching for any accounts of mysterious stains that looked like human figures. I found stories about water damage that formed shapes. I found claims of paranormal sightings. Nothing matched exactly what I was experiencing. That only made me more anxious. A month after the first time I saw the stain, it appeared again. The same routine. I noticed a small blotch forming on the ceiling one evening. By the next night, it had grown into that full silhouette. The air felt stale. My stomach turned. My hands shook. My eyes felt dry. I remember lying there, staring at the shape, counting the seconds, hoping it would fade. It didn't. I got up, paced around my apartment, and opened all the windows. No breeze, no relief. I tried to watch a stupid TV show to calm down. My mind kept wandering back to the bedroom. After an hour, I crept in to check. It seemed to move a little, maybe shifting a few inches, but I wasn't sure if that was real or if I was just tense. I decided to sleep on the couch again. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a clanging noise from the pipes. That old building sometimes made random sounds, but this was loud. I got up, heart pounding, and walked to the bedroom door. I turned on the light. The stain was there, bigger than ever. It looked like it was about a foot longer than before, almost like it stretched from one side of the ceiling to the other. My head spun. I felt sweat trickle down my neck. I went back to the living room and sat with my head in my hands until I fell asleep. In the morning, I walked in with the sunlight pouring through the window, and the silhouette was much smaller. I took more pictures. I also noticed the paint looked normal on the rest of the ceiling. No cracks or peeling. No sign of water damage, just that same brown outline. I called the leak specialist again. He came and checked everything a second time. Still no leaks, no moisture. I started to think maybe I should just leave the apartment, but my lease wasn't up, and I didn't have money to break it. Plus, I was curious. A part of me wanted to see what this was. I hated that feeling of curiosity, but it was there. For a while, I tried ignoring it. When the stain was gone, I'd pretend nothing was wrong. I'd invite a friend over, order pizza, watch a movie. I wouldn't mention the ceiling. But at night, when I was alone, I'd feel the tension in my stomach. I'd keep an eye on the ceiling. Every small speck made me jump. Most nights it wouldn't appear. Then, every few weeks it would. And each time, the same heavy feeling crept into my room. I noticed I'd have trouble swallowing. My mouth would get dry. My fingers would twitch and I'd feel that sense of dread. I'd try to calm my breathing, but my heart would race no matter what. One time I tried throwing a tennis ball at it, like that would do anything. The ball hit the ceiling, dropped to the floor, and the shape stayed right there. I felt silly for doing that. Another time, I tried wiping it with a cloth. No effect. It just felt like normal ceiling. I even tried painting over it when it disappeared, just in case. But the next time it came back, it showed through the new paint. Now it's been several months, it still appears off and on. I've sort of accepted it. But I can't relax. Every night I walk into my bedroom with caution. When I don't see the stain, I feel relief. But I still wonder if it'll come back later. Sometimes I'll wake up at 3 in the morning, glance up, and see that shape. My pulse will hammer, and I'll feel my body tense up. Then by sunrise, it's faint again. I don't know if I'm dealing with something paranormal or if there's some bizarre natural cause. All I have are these weird shifting silhouettes on my ceiling, the heavy air when it appears, and the fact that no professional can explain it. I've double-checked the roof, the pipes, the paint. Everything is normal, except for that shape that shows up whenever it wants, and then disappears like it was never there. I've stopped trying to rationalize it in detail. At this point, I just deal with it as it comes. I keep a flashlight next to my bed. When I see it growing, I turn on the light and watch it shrink. It helps me feel a little more in control. I still get that queasy feeling in my gut, and I still break out in a sweat sometimes. But at least I'm not running out of my apartment in the middle of the night anymore. I have no clue how long this will keep going. Maybe one day I'll move out, but I can't afford that right now. Every time the shape disappears for a stretch, I feel hopeful that maybe it's gone for good. And then I'll wake up at 2 in the morning with that weight in the air, look up, and there it is again. I wish I had a definitive ending to this story. I don't. I'm still living it. Right now, as I stand in my bedroom, the ceiling looks clear. But I know the next time that stain appears, I'll feel that chill, and my heart will race again. I might sleep on the couch or drive around until I calm down. That's my reality. I don't know if it's a ghost, a glitch in my building's structure, or my own mind messing with me. All I know is that the brown silhouette keeps showing up, and I can't find a single explanation that makes sense. I'm stuck with it. That's my life these days, and it's not something I can ignore anymore, no matter how much I try. I got home one night and dropped my keys on the kitchen table. I felt worn out. I stared at the single lamp glowing in the living room. My brother's phone line had been canceled a few months before, and I thought that chapter was closed. Yet there was this nagging feeling in my gut, something that made me uneasy. I needed to sit down. I needed to breathe. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen. The name on the notification wasn't a name. It was my brother's old number, and the message said, "You still have my fishing rod?" I felt my chest tighten. My arms stiffened. I stopped breathing for a few seconds. I checked the screen again to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The notification was still there, plain as day. The same phone number I'd canceled, the exact digits I'd called for years whenever I wanted to share something with him. The text was the kind of casual question he used to ask me all the time. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic. It was just him asking if I still had his fishing rod. And that's what shook me the most. It felt normal in a very abnormal moment. I swiped the screen to open my messages. The conversation thread didn't exist. There was no new message in my inbox. It was empty except for old texts from work and a few automated alerts. No message from that number. I felt my palms sweat. My hand shook a bit while I tapped around the phone's interface. Nothing. I locked the screen and unlocked it again. Still, there was no record of that text, but the notification had been there. I was certain of it. My heart was pounding, and I had to lean against the kitchen counter. I stood there for maybe a full minute, trying to figure out what to do next. I still felt that rush of adrenaline in my body. My arms felt weak. My knees were unsteady. I tried to breathe through my nose, slow and steady. I reminded myself that weird glitches can happen. People sometimes get old messages from nowhere, or phones randomly push old notifications. I'd read about stuff like that on tech forums, but my brother's line had been canceled. I remember calling the carrier and explaining the situation. I remember verifying the final bill. It was definitely shut down. I managed to calm down enough to think about the next step. I decided to open my phone app and try calling that number. Maybe someone else had it now. Maybe the carrier reassigned it to a new customer, and it was some messed up coincidence or a prank. I opened the dialer and typed in the digits. I recognized each one. Before I pressed the call button, I paused. My thumb hovered over the screen. My chest felt heavy again. I felt a sort of anxiety in my throat. But I pressed the button. The call rang once. It rang twice. Then it cut off, like a busy signal, but not exactly. I heard a weird beep, then silence. I checked the phone screen. It showed call ended. I tried again. The same thing happened. 2 rings, then a short beep, then nothing. No voicemail greeting, no automated message telling me the line was disconnected. I tried a 3rd time. Same result. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the counter. My stomach felt knotted. I locked my phone again. I looked around the apartment. It felt too quiet. The living room lamp cast a weak, yellowish light, and the corners were dark. The air conditioner hummed, but there was no other sound. My heart was still thumping, and I noticed my shirt felt damp under my arms. I swallowed hard. I considered texting back. That message on my lock screen had a reply option. Maybe I could try a direct response. I unlocked the phone and tapped out. Who is this? Simple and straightforward. I pressed send. It showed the little spinning circle for a second. Then it said, message not sent. Tap to retry. My phone had good signal. I saw 4 bars of coverage, so there was no reason for the message to fail. I tapped to retry. Same result. Message not sent. I took a screenshot of my phone just in case I needed proof later. I tried a different approach. I went into the Contacts app, tapped New Contact, and typed in that number. I pressed Save. The phone let me save it, so now it was in my contact list. I tried texting again through that contact. The text wouldn't go through. I felt a chill in my arms, and I rubbed them with my hands. The hairs on my neck were standing up. I set my phone down and leaned back on the counter. My mind was racing with questions. I thought about some random person messing with me, but it made no sense. How would they know about the fishing rod? That was something my brother always asked about, especially after our last fishing trip. He left that rod at my place a long time ago. He'd tease me about it, act like I stole it or that I should take it out on the lake. No one else had that exact memory with me. It was just between the two of us. After a few minutes, I decided to double-check the phone plan situation. I walked to my desk in the corner of the living room. I had a file folder with old bills and documents. I flicked on a small desk lamp and started looking for the phone bill from my brother's account. My hands were still shaky, and I felt a strain in my lower back from bending over the drawer. I flipped through my papers until I found the final statement from the carrier. It was stamped, canceled. The date matched what I remembered, so the line was officially done. I dialed the carrier's customer service number. It was late, but they had a 24-hour line. I waited on hold, listening to that scratchy hold music. Eventually, a representative picked up. I explained the situation. I said I got a text from a canceled line. I gave the canceled number. The representative asked for verification details. I provided the old account number. I gave the representative my brother's name. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I felt uneasy. The rep clicked around on a computer system for a bit. Eventually, she told me the line was not only canceled, but it hadn't been reassigned. Nobody should be able to use that number. She sounded a little confused. She asked if I might have the number saved incorrectly, or if I had an older text that got re-notified. I said that might be possible, but it still didn't explain the question about the fishing rod. There was a pause. She told me there was nothing else on their end that she could see. Then she asked if I needed anything else. I told her no, thanked her, and hung up. The call didn't give me any answers, and I felt my head throbbing. I shut the desk drawer and tossed the phone bill folder back inside. Then I slid into my desk chair. My heart rate was starting to slow, but I still felt this tightness in my chest. I tried to think rationally. It could have been some weird glitch. Maybe an old text from before the line got canceled was stuck in some system and it came through now. But the mention of the fishing rod was exactly what he used to say in casual conversation. I rubbed my temples. My mouth was dry, so I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. I took a long drink and felt the cold liquid run down my throat. That sensation grounded me for a second. I went back to my living room and collapsed onto the couch. I looked at my phone again. I checked for any new notifications. There was nothing. I scrolled through my messaging app. The text still didn't appear in the conversation list. Only the screenshot I took was proof that it had ever appeared. I stared at that screenshot. The words, "You still have my fishing rod?" were in that small bubble. The timestamp was from about 20 minutes ago. There was no name, just the old phone number. I zoomed in on the screenshot, looking at each digit. It was definitely his number. I turned on the TV for background noise. I put on some random show, but I wasn't watching it. The voices in the background made the apartment feel less isolating. My body still felt tense. My shoulders were stiff. My legs felt restless. I thought about texting a friend or calling someone to tell them about this, but I didn't know where to start. It sounded ridiculous. It felt strange to even consider that something beyond a glitch had happened. Yet part of me couldn't ignore the details. My friend Tim knew about the fishing rod, but that was because I mentioned it in passing once. Would he pull a prank like that? It seemed too cruel. I scrolled through my contacts, thinking of who might have the motive or the knowledge. Everyone I knew was either close enough to understand it was a sensitive topic, or they were too distant to even think about it. I locked my phone again. I realized my foot was tapping anxiously on the floor, so I stood up and paced around the living room. The tension in my stomach hadn't gone away. My breathing was shallow. I felt like something was off. I looked at the window, checking if maybe I forgot to close the blinds. They were shut, and the city lights outside gave off a faint glow around the edges. Eventually, I decided to go find that fishing rod. It was stored in my closet. If the question was out there, I wanted to see the object. I thought maybe it would help me feel more grounded. So I walked to my bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a large plastic bin. I set it on the floor. I felt a dull ache in my knees as I crouched down. I popped the lid off the bin. Right on top was the fishing rod case. I lifted it out and unzipped it halfway. The rod was inside, in two pieces. I touched it. It felt smooth and cold. I closed the case and rested it against the wall. I stared at it for a good minute. Memories tried to bubble up, but I pushed them away. I didn't want to dwell on the past. I picked the rod up, carried it back to the living room, and leaned it in the corner. I sat on the couch and looked at it from a distance. My phone was next to me, silent and still. The TV was playing some late-night infomercial, but I kept the volume low. I wondered if the phone would buzz again. My eyes kept shifting to it every few seconds. Time passed, maybe half an hour or more. I sat there, not sure what to do. The phone didn't vibrate. I tried sending another text, this time from my messaging app to that saved contact. Again it said, "Message not sent." I tapped it to retry. No luck. I sighed and put the phone down. My heart rate had calmed, but I felt a headache creeping in, and my eyes were tired. I decided I would power my phone off and power it on again. Maybe that would clear any weird glitch. I held the side button, slid to power off, and waited for the screen to go dark. Then I pressed the button again until the Apple logo lit up. Once it booted, I entered my passcode. No new messages. The notification about the fishing rod was gone, except for the screenshot. Everything felt normal now. I got up and walked to the kitchen. I opened a drawer and grabbed a small flashlight. Sometimes when I'm restless, I organize things around the apartment. I decided to check the fuse box in the hallway closet just to distract myself. I aimed the flashlight around, making sure everything looked in place. Then I closed it. I put the flashlight on a shelf. I took a moment to stand in the hallway staring at the wall. My mind was still caught in a loop about the text. I felt my heart picking up again, so I forced myself to take slow, deliberate breaths. In through my nose, out through my mouth. I walked back to the living room and switched off the TV. The silence felt thick. The lamp cast the same dim light on the couch, the coffee table, and the fishing rod in the corner. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My phone was on the couch cushion where I left it. I picked it up, turned it on, and stared at the screen. Part of me hoped a new text would appear to give me some clarity. Nothing happened. It stayed silent. I opened the screenshot again, looked at the text one more time, then closed the photo gallery. I decided to put the phone face down on the table. I felt that tension in my neck, that tightness behind my eyes. My shoulders ached. I sat down and rubbed my face with my hands. I stayed like that for a while, elbows on my knees, trying to relax. Eventually, I realized how late it was. I needed to get some rest. But I knew sleeping wouldn't be easy. My mind was buzzing. Before I headed to bed, I picked up the fishing rod and carried it back to my bedroom closet. I placed it back in the bin and closed the lid. Then I walked around the apartment, double-checking the door locks and turning off the lights. The sense of unease lingered, but I couldn't do anything else about it. I knew I would probably spend the next day calling the phone company again or searching online for an explanation. But that night, all I could do was try to sleep. When I finally lay down, I felt my legs tremble a bit, probably from the adrenaline wearing off. I pulled the covers over me and stared at the dark ceiling. The phone was on my nightstand, silent. I felt my throat tighten and my eyes sting, but I blinked the feeling away. My pulse slowed, my breathing steadied. I thought about the text one more time. "You still have my fishing rod?" That was all it said. I had no answers. I just stayed there in the dark, listening to my own breathing. Eventually, my exhaustion got the better of me and I drifted off. The phone never buzzed again that night. I got home last March and saw the rocking chair moving on its own. It was a slow, steady motion, almost like someone had just gotten up. I stopped at the doorway and stared at it. My chest tightened. My hands felt cold. My mouth went dry. That chair belonged to my father. He used to sit there around dusk, smoking a cigar and staring out the window. He was gone now. I kept the chair in the living room, right next to the window. I never planned to get rid of it because it reminded me of him. But I didn't expect it to start rocking by itself. When I walked in, I thought there might be a draft. My house is old, and sometimes the windows don't shut properly. I put my bag on the floor and closed the door behind me. I stood still for a moment. I didn't hear any wind. The windows were closed. The air felt stale and heavy. I took a few steps toward the chair. The wooden floor creaked under my shoes. The chair kept moving for a few more seconds and then stopped. My heart pounded. I rested my hand on the back of the chair. It was warm, as if someone had been sitting there. I glanced around, but I didn't see anything unusual. I felt a little silly, so I tried to calm down. I shrugged it off and went to the kitchen to make some coffee. That night, I replayed it in my head. I sat on the couch and kept glancing at the rocking chair. It didn't move again. I told myself it was a breeze or something I'd knocked loose when I walked in. I still felt uneasy. It wasn't just that it moved. It was how it moved. It looked gentle, like it was pushed from behind by someone who stood up carefully. My mind lingered on that thought until I went to bed. A few months later, I came home on another important date. That date mattered to me because it was the day my father got promoted a long time ago. We always treated it like a special occasion. My father used to say it changed his life. I never really thought about that day much after he was gone, but that evening I remembered. I walked into the living room, feeling a little down about the past. I flipped on the light and froze in place. The rocking chair was moving again. This time it moved more slowly, barely swaying back and forth. My pulse kicked up. I set my keys on the table next to the door. My legs felt stiff. I took a step forward and heard the floor creak. The chair kept moving. I walked over to the window and placed my hand near the frame. No wind came through. I looked up at the ceiling fan. It was turned off. The chair kept rocking and I stood there watching it. I didn't want to look away. I wanted proof that something strange was going on. I pulled out my phone and tried to record a video. I saw the rocking motion on the screen, but it looked weaker. It looked like a tiny movement caused by a small draft. I felt a jolt of frustration. In person, I could see it was more than just a slight sway. It was a distinct motion, like a person had just stood up and walked away. But on the phone, it looked so minimal, like barely anything was happening. I stopped recording. My hands were shaking. I didn't know how to explain it. I grabbed the chair's arm and stopped it from moving. Then I let go. It stayed still. I couldn't sleep that night. My heart thumped in my ears when I tried to close my eyes. I got up a few times to check the living room. The chair never moved while I was looking at it. Around 3 a.m., I decided to sit in it. That was the first time I'd done that since I brought it into my house. I felt uneasy about it, like I was intruding. The wood creaked under my weight. I leaned back and stared at the dark room. I could smell a faint cigar scent, probably from all the times he sat in it, though I never noticed it before. My eyes started to sting, so I closed them. I remembered him sitting there every evening, especially when I got home from work. We never had long talks, but he'd nod at me and keep smoking. I tried not to think too hard about it. After a few minutes, I got up, went back to my bed, and finally drifted off. Over the next few weeks, nothing happened. The chair stayed still whenever I was around. I didn't feel anything strange. It felt like my life had gone back to normal. Then my father's birthday came. It was a day I usually spent remembering him. Sometimes I'd look at old photos or watch some sports program he used to like. That night I got home late from work. I was tired and didn't feel like cooking, so I grabbed some leftovers from the fridge and went to the living room. The moment I flipped on the lights, I felt my stomach drop. The chair was rocking again. This time it was a little faster. The backrest was leaning forward, then leaning back. The seat made a slight squeak every time it moved. I stood there, holding my food in one hand. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. My legs felt tense. I set my plate on the coffee table. I turned on my phone's camera again. Through the screen, the motion looked less noticeable. It was still there, but it looked like it could be explained away by an air current. I felt frustrated and scared at the same time. I took a deep breath and approached the chair. My hands trembled. I reached out and touched the backrest. It felt solid, but it wasn't cold or warm. I held it still and then released it. The rocking continued on its own for a few seconds, then gradually came to a stop. I couldn't stand feeling so unsure. I decided to run some tests. I opened the windows to see how the wind would affect it. When I opened them wide, the chair barely moved. I turned on the ceiling fan. It made the curtains sway a bit, but the chair didn't move enough to match what I'd seen before. I got a small level from my toolbox and checked the floor around the chair. It was perfectly flat. I realized none of these things explained the motion. I felt a chill down my neck. I left the house that evening and went for a walk. I needed some air. As I walked, I kept thinking about how the chair only moved on days that mattered to my father or to me. I thought about his promotion day, his birthday, and other days that had some connection to his life. It wasn't random. It felt like it meant something. I came back home after about an hour. The chair was still. I went straight to my bedroom and lay down. I stared at the ceiling. My mind raced with thoughts about him. I was uneasy, but part of me felt a hint of comfort, like maybe he was visiting. I shook off that idea because it sounded too strange to accept. I wasn't a big believer in anything beyond what I could see. I fell asleep and had restless dreams about coming home and seeing him in that chair. Over the next several months, it happened a few more times. Each time I noticed it was on a specific date. One was the day he bought his first car. Another was the day he came home from a big trip. I recognized the pattern. I tried to ignore it. It was too unsettling. But each time I felt the same physical response. My heart would race, and my arms would break out in goosebumps. My chest felt tight. I'd try to slow my breathing. I hated feeling that adrenaline rush in my own home. One day I decided to invite a friend over. I wanted someone else to see the chair. I told him everything. He looked at me like I was imagining things. But he agreed to come by on a date I expected it might happen. The anniversary of my father's big sports victory from years back. My friend arrived in the evening, around the same time I usually noticed the chair moving. We sat in the living room, eating pizza. Nothing happened for an hour, so I relaxed. I thought maybe this time it wouldn't happen. Then I got up to get some drinks from the kitchen. When I returned, the chair was moving. My friend stood there with his eyes wide, staring at it. He turned to me and said it had started rocking about 10 seconds after I left the room. I felt a jolt go through my body. I noticed my friend's hands were shaking. We both approached the chair. My friend tried to record it on his phone, but again on the screen it looked weak and not convincing. In person it was very clear. It rocked with a purpose. My friend said he had no idea what could cause that. We checked the windows, the fan, and everything else. Nothing explained it. My friend left that night looking pale and uneasy. After that, I couldn't ignore it. I started marking down the days it happened on a calendar. Each date had some link to my father. Sometimes it was obvious, like his birthday. Other times it was less obvious, like the day he fixed the fence in the backyard a long time ago. I remembered that date because it was a big project he was proud of. Apparently, that day mattered enough for the chair to move. I tried to see if there was some random logic to it, but it always came back to something about him. I spent more time in the living room waiting to see if I could catch the moment it started. Usually it happened when I wasn't looking or when I stepped out of the room. Once I thought I saw it begin to move in my peripheral vision, but when I turned my head, it was already in motion. Sometimes I heard a soft creaking sound just before I noticed it. It was like hearing floorboards shift under someone's weight. One evening, I stood right in front of the chair on another anniversary. I kept my eyes fixed on it. My arms were crossed and I tapped my foot on the floor. My heart pounded. I wanted to see if it would move while I watched. My phone was in my hand, ready to record. For almost an hour, nothing happened. Then my phone buzzed with a text. I looked down for a second. I heard a soft creak. I looked back up. The chair was rocking. I let out a shaky breath and started recording. As before, the video just showed a faint movement. In real life, the chair rocked with more force. I cursed under my breath and stopped recording. I grabbed the chair's armrest. I held it for a few seconds. My arm felt tense. I released my grip. The chair gave a final sway and went still. I felt drained. Every time this happened, my body reacted with a rush of nervous energy. My legs felt weak. My palms got sweaty. My mind raced in circles trying to find an explanation. I started keeping the lights on more often. I had trouble sleeping. I was always on alert, expecting to hear the chair creaking. Last month, I sat on my couch late at night. My lights were dim, and I was scrolling through my phone. I glanced at the calendar and realized the next day was the date my father and I once took a trip together. I felt my heart rate go up. I didn't want to see the chair move again. I decided to go to bed early, hoping to sleep through it. But around 10 p.m., I heard that soft creaking from the living room. I froze. My muscles tensed. My throat felt tight. I didn't want to go in there, but I forced myself. I walked into the living room. The chair was rocking in the dark. It looked so clear in the faint light coming from the hallway. It wasn't a small sway. It was a back and forth motion like someone was sitting in it and pushing off with their feet. My mouth felt dry. I stepped closer. The chair kept going. I didn't record it this time, I just stood there. I watched it rock for a minute or two. Then it slowed down until it stopped. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My shirt felt damp with sweat. I turned on all the lights and sat on the couch trying to calm down. I felt my pulse in my ears. My mind was blank except for the sound of my own breathing. After a while, I got up and walked around the house, checking windows, doors, and anything else that could explain it. I found nothing. That night, I barely slept. Now I expect it. When a meaningful date approaches, I come home with my stomach in knots. I open the door slowly. My breath catches in my throat. I look at the chair. Sometimes it's moving. Sometimes it's still, and it starts moving later. I've stopped trying to record it. I've stopped trying to explain it. I just watch, hold my breath, and wait until it stops. It never does any harm. It just seems to move. Then it goes still again. I get the feeling it's connected to him. I don't say that out loud. I don't talk to people about it anymore. But it hasn't stopped. And it only happens on those special dates. That's my reality. I keep the chair in the same spot, by the window. I don't sit in it anymore. I keep a distance from it most days. Sometimes I'll stand in front of it and wonder if it will move. Usually it doesn't. But on those nights, the nights that matter, it rocks on its own. It feels personal and unsettling. My heart still pounds every single time. My hands get cold. My thoughts rush. Then it ends. I let out a breath. I wipe the sweat from my forehead, and I try to relax. That's all I've got. I still live in the same house. The chair is still there. It still moves on those dates. I've grown used to it, even though it makes my body tense up every time. I guess I just accept it now. There's no big conclusion. There's no explanation I've found. It just happens. I come home and sometimes the chair is rocking gently like someone just stood up from it. And that's it. I'm left there, breathing hard, staring at it, waiting for it to stop. I've lived on this street for about 4 years and I've never had any real trouble. It's quiet with only a few houses on each side and a lot of gaps where the streetlights barely reach. I liked that peaceful vibe at first, but then something weird started happening. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I kept hearing this faint trim like a bicycle bell, moving past my house at a slow pace. It sounded steady, like someone casually pedaling right along the sidewalk. But every time I looked out my window, I saw nothing. No shadow, no outline, and definitely no bike. The first time I noticed it, I thought I was dreaming. I remember lying in bed, half asleep, when my ears picked up that gentle ringing. It wasn't loud, but it had a distinct 2-note pattern. Trim, followed by a pause. Then it repeated once or twice before fading away. I blinked a few times, tried to focus, and I realized I was actually awake. My bedroom window was cracked open because it was a warm night. I got up, walked over to the window, and looked down at the street. The sidewalk looked empty. No movement. Nothing. The bell was gone too. I shook my head, thinking maybe some passing cyclist had come by, but I couldn't figure out why they'd be out there at that hour. My block isn't the best lit place, and it's uncommon to see anyone riding a bike around 2 in the morning unless they're heading home from a late shift. But I saw no headlights, no reflective gear, nothing. I stood there for a minute waiting to see if anyone would pop into view. The street was still and mostly dark except for a faint orange glow from a street lamp at the far corner. After a while, I went back to bed. For the next few days, I forgot about it. Life went on normally. I work from home, so I usually stay up late. I handle some freelance projects, and sometimes I'm still typing away at midnight. About a week after that first incident, I heard the bell again. This time I was in my living room, seated on the couch, finishing up an email. My laptop was on the coffee table and the TV was on mute. The moment I heard trim trim, my head snapped toward the front window. I set my laptop aside, jumped up, and rushed to the window. I pressed my forehead against the glass. Nothing. The sound lingered for a second, then disappeared. I walked to the front door, opened it slowly, and stepped onto my small porch. The night air felt cool on my face. I glanced down both sides of the street. I didn't see anyone. I listened carefully, hoping for another ring, but there was just the buzz of a distant air conditioner or maybe a power line. It's always quiet around here after midnight, so any small sound stands out. But I heard nothing else. I stood there for a minute, feeling a mild sense of unease. I'm not used to hearing things outside at that hour. When I realized there was no more noise, I went back inside and tried to shake it off. But I couldn't relax. I kept glancing at the windows, wondering if whoever was riding that bike would loop around again. A couple of nights later, the same thing happened, and it started to become a pattern. The ringing usually came at around 2 or 3 in the morning. It was never very loud, but it was always that same double ring. I would freeze, listen, and then scramble to see who was out there, but every time the street was empty. I began to feel frustrated. I found myself staying up to see if it would happen again. I'd keep my lights off, hoping I could catch a glimpse of movement on the sidewalk, but I never did. One night I decided to sit on my dark porch around that time. I turned off all the indoor lights so there was no glow behind me. I pulled a chair close to the door and sat quietly, scanning the street. After about an hour I started drifting off, my eyes getting heavy. Then I heard the bell. My heart pounded, and I leaned forward. The sound was faint. Trim trim. I focused on the sidewalk in front of my house. I saw no shape, no outline of anyone pedaling by. I craned my neck to look further up the block. The ringing continued, but it seemed to be moving away. I jogged to the end of my short driveway, expecting to see a rider under the dim streetlight at the next corner, but I spotted nothing. The pavement was empty, the shadows still. The ringing faded. I felt a prickling on my neck. I knew I had heard it. I just couldn't explain why there was no one there. I tried telling a friend about it the next day. He laughed and said, maybe some local night owl was riding a bike without headlights. But that didn't explain why I couldn't see a silhouette or any reflective detail. Even in low light, I should have seen some shape moving. I tested it one night by riding my own bike on the same sidewalk at around 11 p.m. I had no lights on my bike, but you could still see my figure or at least sense movement if you looked directly at me. Yet whenever I heard this trim trim, there was absolutely nothing to look at. One night I actually thought I saw a tiny flicker, like a small flashlight beam near the curb. It moved slowly, like someone was pointing a narrow beam at the ground while riding. I was in the kitchen grabbing a glass of water when the bell chimed again. I rushed to my front window and saw a faint line of light dancing across the pavement. It jerked around, as if it was attached to someone's hand on a handlebar. My heart raced. I decided to go outside again, but by the time I opened my front door, the beam had vanished and the bell stopped. I hurried to the edge of the sidewalk, trying to catch any sign of someone. But the street was empty. I felt a wave of goosebumps on my arms. That experience rattled me more than the others. Now I had seen something, even if it was just for a second. It meant there was a physical object out there, or at least some source of light. I started to worry that maybe someone was playing a trick on me. I don't have any known enemies, and I usually mind my own business. But it crossed my mind that maybe someone was messing with me, trying to freak me out. I considered setting up a camera on my porch, aiming it at the street. Maybe I'd catch a figure on video. But I hesitated because that felt too paranoid. Also, I wasn't sure if it would even pick up something in the darkness. Most home security cameras need a decent light source to show detail. After a few more nights of hearing the bell, I decided I had to do something. The interruptions were affecting my sleep and making me uneasy at night. So I drove to a hardware store and bought a decent motion-activated spotlight. I installed it above my porch, angling it so it would cover the sidewalk and part of the street in front of my house. The installation took me a couple of hours. I tested it by walking around at night, and it lit up whenever I stepped into the sensor's range. I hoped that if the cyclist came by, the spotlight would flick on, and I'd finally see who it was. The first night with the new spotlight, I stayed up again, watching through a gap in my curtains. Around 2:15 a.m., I heard the bell. Trim, trim. I tensed up, stared at my porch light, waiting for it to flare on. It stayed dark. I felt a tightness in my chest. How could it not detect movement? The bell sounded like it was right in front of my house. I inched closer to the window, trying not to blink. Another soft trim, trim, and then silence. The spotlight never activated. After a few seconds, I rushed outside. I stood under the sensor, and it clicked on, flooding the sidewalk with bright light. The moment it did, I saw an empty street. No bike, no person. I tried walking up and down the block, shining my phone's flashlight into every corner. Nothing. The houses next door were dark. Nobody was outside. It was just me. I felt a chill on my skin. I turned back to my house, locked the door behind me, and paced around the living room. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. I couldn't think of a rational explanation. If someone was outside on a bike, the spotlight should have caught them. Yet it didn't. For the next week, the same pattern continued. Some nights I'd hear the bell 2 or 3 times. Other nights there would be only a single ring. Each time the spotlight stayed off, and I'd see nothing when I looked out. My frustration turned into a kind of numb acceptance. I started wearing earplugs to bed because I couldn't handle jumping up every night. But the earplugs weren't perfect. Sometimes I still heard the faint bell through them. One evening I felt determined to catch the source of that sound once and for all. I took a flashlight, put on a dark hoodie, and decided to wait outside near the edge of my property, behind a short row of hedges. I crouched there around 1:45 a.m., feeling the rough ground on my knees. I kept the flashlight off to avoid giving myself away. My plan was to pop up as soon as I heard the bell and point my flashlight at whoever was riding by. It was quiet for a long time. I started feeling the strain in my legs. My back ached a bit from leaning forward, but I stayed focused. Then, at around 2:30 a.m., I heard it again. Trim, trim. My heart pounded. The sound was close, but I couldn't see anything on the sidewalk. I gripped my flashlight and waited. Another ring echoed softly. I stood up in one swift motion and flicked my flashlight on, aiming at the sidewalk in front of me. I moved it left, right, up, down. The beam illuminated the concrete, a parked car, and parts of my neighbor's front yard. Nothing else, no movement, no wheels turning. I felt my hands shaking as I lowered the flashlight. I took a step onto the sidewalk, listening. My breath was shallow and my heart hammered. I walked a few paces forward, scanning the street for any shape that could be hiding in the dark. The air smelled damp, and I felt a slight breeze. The quietness felt heavy. I stayed out there for several minutes, but the bell didn't ring again. Finally, I gave up and went back inside. I locked the door and leaned against it, feeling a surge of adrenaline drain from my body. At that point, I considered calling the police, but I knew what they'd say. They'd probably come out, shine a flashlight around, find nothing, and tell me they couldn't do much unless I had more concrete evidence. I didn't want the hassle, and I wasn't in danger, at least not physically. No one was threatening me directly. It was just the bell, over and over. I started to think maybe I was stuck in some weird cycle. Maybe I should just ignore it and go about my life. But it was hard to ignore something that woke me up at random hours. I tried sleeping with a white noise machine. It helped a little. Some nights I wouldn't notice the bell at all. Other nights it still got through the noise. And whenever I heard it, my pulse would spike and I'd feel the same dread, the same confusion. One afternoon I spoke to a neighbor across the street. I didn't mention the bell. I just asked if he'd seen anyone riding a bike at odd hours. He gave me a puzzled look and said he hadn't noticed anything unusual. He told me it was pretty dead around here after midnight. That was it. No one else seemed to hear or see anything. That made me feel more isolated. I began to keep it to myself. Even now, I still hear the bell sometimes, It hasn't gone away, and I haven't figured out who or what causes it. I keep my curtains drawn at night, but I can't help peeking through them when the ringing starts. I never see any shape or movement. The old motion spotlight is still up there, and it never clicks on when the bell sounds. The weird beam of light I once saw hasn't shown up again. I keep telling myself it's some kind of mechanical malfunction or an echo from somewhere else, but that doesn't line up with the actual location of the sound. It's always right there, as if someone is moving along the sidewalk in front of my house. I don't know how long this will keep happening. I don't have a plan to make it stop. I guess I've learned to live with it, even though it still makes my heart race at night. Sometimes I open my window just a crack, hoping to catch that sound again to prove I'm not losing it. I sit there in the darkness, listening for that slow, deliberate trim. It usually arrives when I'm not expecting it. It reminds me that there are things I can't pin down no matter how hard I try. After months of hearing it, I've stopped running to the sidewalk. I just listen. I look out the window and I see nothing, but I still hear the bell. Then it fades. Then the street is quiet again. And that's it. That's the whole situation. I live on a quiet street with poor lighting, and around 2 or 3 in the morning, an unseen cyclist, or something, passes by, ringing a bell. I can't see it, I can't catch it, and I can't make sense of it. I wish I had some neat conclusion, but I don't. It's just what happens here, night after night, without explanation. For now, I just wait for the next time, hoping one day I'll throw open the door and see a real, tangible person there. But so far, there's nothing to see except an empty sidewalk and an echo of that bell in my ears. I woke up on Monday feeling a knot in my gut. I couldn't ignore the tension anymore. Every morning for the last few weeks, I'd open the door to my office and find my desk drawer unlocked. Papers would be all over the place, but nothing was ever missing. It wasn't logical. There was no sign of forced entry, and I always locked that drawer before leaving. I was tired of feeling like an idiot. I was done suspecting random people. Something was off, and I needed to find out what was happening. My name's Rick. I'm in my mid-30s, and I work in an administrative office that handles sensitive documents. I have a standard metal desk with 3 drawers on one side. The bottom drawer is deeper and has a lock. That's where I keep the more confidential paperwork. It's mostly contracts, proposals, and some personal notes. Nobody else should have access to them, so I keep a key with me at all times. My boss and coworkers respect privacy, or so I thought. The first time I noticed the drawer unlocked, I figured I must have been careless. I thought maybe I was in a rush and didn't turn the key all the way. But it kept happening, and I double-checked everything each night. It made no sense. I felt uneasy every morning. I'd walk into my small corner of the office, flick on the overhead light, and look straight at that drawer. The moment I saw it was even slightly ajar, I'd feel my heartbeat picking up. I'd yank the drawer open, confirm the contents were still there, and see that some of the documents had been shifted around or laid out on the desk. I started to get paranoid. My colleagues, Paul and Marcia, share the room next to mine. They never admitted to messing with my stuff, and I had no reason to think they'd gain anything from it. We all handled different segments of the company's paperwork. I tried asking around casually. I'd say, "Hey, did you notice anything weird in the office at night?" Or, "You guys hear the cleaning crew messing with things?" They only shook their heads. The cleaning crew usually comes around 9 p.m. They do their routine and they leave. I eventually spoke to the janitor. He insisted he never touched my drawers, and he had no reason to open them. He even let me check his ring of keys. None of them matched my drawer lock. That didn't help me relax, though. I still walked in each morning and felt a tightness in my chest every time I saw that unlocked drawer. I bought a small, inexpensive camera after the 3rd time this happened. I'm not a security expert. I just wanted something that could record overnight and hopefully show me who was messing around. The camera wasn't fancy. It recorded in color and had a motion sensor that would start recording when something moved in its field of view. I positioned it on top of a bookshelf that faces my desk. From that angle, you'd see the drawer and anyone who approached it. I thought that was enough. For 2 nights, nothing strange happened. I came in, found my drawer still locked, and let out a sigh of relief. Then, on the third morning, I walked in and found the drawer open again. Same story. Documents scattered, nothing missing. My throat went dry. I checked the camera. The battery was fine, and the camera was still on, but the footage for that night was frozen. It showed nothing after 2 a.m. It was like the camera had just stopped recording, and then it picked up again in the morning when I walked in. All I saw was a static image of my desk. No sign of anyone approaching. That gave me a chill. It felt like someone was mocking me, messing with the camera on purpose, making sure I wouldn't see who it was. The next night, I set up the camera again. I made sure it was properly charged and that the memory card had plenty of space. I even tested it after hours by waving my hand in front of it. The motion sensor seemed to work. Then I locked the drawer, triple-checked it, and went home. The following morning, the drawer was locked. I breathed a sigh of relief, but I was still tense. I checked the footage. Everything recorded smoothly, from the moment I left until I got in. There were a few random lights turning on and off in the hallway, probably from the cleaning crew. Nothing came near my desk. That night, I hoped the pattern of safety would continue. It didn't. The next morning, I walked in to see the drawer halfway open again. My pulse was pounding. I rubbed the back of my neck and felt sweat. The camera's battery was inexplicably drained. 0%. It didn't record anything. I never had battery issues with that camera before, but now it was dead. I plugged it into my laptop. The only files on the memory card were from the previous day. Nothing from that night. I felt anger rising in my chest. Something was off. It wasn't just a random coworker or a curious cleaning person. It was deliberate sabotage or something else. I tried to keep a level head. I told my boss, but he didn't believe it was a big deal. He said maybe the drawer was defective or maybe I'd been absent-minded. I told him I'd locked it carefully and had video proof of weird camera malfunctions. He shrugged. He said he'd ask building security to do a patrol. That wasn't enough for me. I decided to buy a better camera, one with a night vision feature and a more reliable battery. It cost me more than I wanted to spend, but I felt it was necessary. I also picked up a small external battery pack. My plan was to keep the camera plugged into that battery pack to ensure it wouldn't die on me. I set it all up the next evening. I told my coworkers I was doing an experiment with the camera for a personal project. I didn't want them to think I was accusing them. I placed the camera in a corner behind a stack of boxes so it wouldn't be too obvious. I made sure the lens had a clear view of my desk. I put a piece of tape over the tiny light that indicates the camera is on, hoping that would keep it hidden. Then I locked the drawer. I locked it so many times I felt stupid. I turned the key, pulled the drawer, confirmed it was secure. No movement. I left the office with a sense of dread. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling around the idea that maybe I'd come in the next day and see the drawer open again. I wanted to be wrong, but it felt inevitable. I woke up with a headache, got ready, and drove to work. My stomach was tight, like I was bracing for a punch. I unlocked the office door and I went straight for my desk. The drawer was open again. Papers were scattered. I stared at them. My throat felt dry and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I went to the camera. It was still there, still plugged into the battery pack. The battery pack was drained. The camera was turned off. I tried turning it on, but it wouldn't respond. I took a few deep breaths and reminded myself that no one was hurt and nothing was stolen. But I felt invaded, like there was no privacy. I could almost feel my hands shaking. I brought the camera home that evening, charged it fully, and checked the memory card on my computer. There was some footage from the early part of the evening. It showed me locking the drawer, adjusting things, and leaving. Then, around 1 a.m., and the recording just stopped. The last frame was normal. My desk was visible, the lights were off, and nothing was moving. Then it went black. No file corruption, no glitch. Just an abrupt end to the footage. That detail freaked me out. It was like someone had pulled the plug or yanked the battery, but everything was still connected when I got there. I felt my nerves on edge. My body was tense. I considered sleeping in the office, but I worried that might violate company policy, or at least raise uncomfortable questions. I also wasn't sure if I'd even catch whoever was doing this. What if I just ended up looking like a fool in front of my boss or the cleaning crew? Still, the next night I decided to stay late. I told the boss I had a lot of work to do on some complicated reports. He didn't mind. I was alone in the office by 10 p.m. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The building was quiet except for the occasional hum of the air conditioning. I didn't do much actual work. I kept the lights off, except for a small lamp near my desk. I locked the drawer. I set up the new camera again, this time inside a different nook, hidden behind a file organizer with only a tiny gap for the lens. Then I pretended to leave by turning off the lamp and stepping out for a few minutes. But I came back quietly and hid in the corner where the lights didn't reach. I sat there for hours. My back hurt after the first half hour. I tried not to shift too much. I kept an eye on the drawer. Nothing happened for a long time. I checked my phone. It was past midnight. My eyes felt heavy. The building was silent. There was no wind inside, no weird noises, just the low hum of the ventilation system. I wondered if I was wasting my time. Then, a little after 1 a.m., I heard a faint clicking sound. It was coming from the direction of my desk. I couldn't see clearly in the darkness, so I slowly stood up, leaning against the wall and tried to get a better look. The drawer was still locked. Then the desk itself vibrated slightly, like someone was rattling it. I strained my ears. My heart pounded so hard that I was worried I'd make noise just by breathing. I walked quietly, one step at a time, closer to the desk. The clicking sound became more rhythmic. It was like something was tapping the lock. There was no glow, no silhouette of a person. I saw a slight shift in the drawer handle. It moved as if someone was tugging on it from inside the desk. My chest felt tight. I was tempted to rush over and grab the handle, but I hesitated. I reached for my phone and tried to turn on its flashlight. As soon as I did that, the noise stopped. The handle went still. I stepped forward and pointed my phone's light at the drawer. It was closed. No sign of tampering. My mouth went dry and I stood there, my hands shaking. I waited a few more minutes, but nothing else happened. I wanted to open the drawer and check inside, but fear held me back. I was worried I'd break some weird tension. I finally forced myself to unlock the drawer. Everything looked normal. Papers were neatly stacked where I'd left them. I locked it again, tested it, and felt that it was secure. I tried to wait longer, but I felt too on edge. After another 30 minutes, I left. I locked the office behind me and went home. My nerves were fried. My head spun with confusion. It was as if I'd imagined that tapping sound, but I knew I heard it. When I got home, I could hardly sleep. My thoughts kept racing. Something had physically moved the drawer handle. I wasn't sure if it was a person or if I was going insane. But I'd stayed in the room, and I didn't see any person come in. The next morning, I returned to the office feeling sick. My stomach churned. When I stepped inside, the drawer was locked. I felt a small wave of relief. At least that night it stayed closed. But the camera was once again turned off. The battery was drained. I took out the memory card and connected it to my laptop. The footage ended around 1 a.m., right at the time I started hearing the clicking. Just like the other times, it suddenly cut off. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. The drawer stayed locked a couple more nights, which let me breathe a little easier. But on a Wednesday morning, I arrived and found it open again. The same pattern, papers on the desk, nothing stolen, camera off, battery drained. I felt lightheaded and frustrated. I checked with the IT guy at work to see if there was any strange power surge or something that could affect the camera. He had no answers. At that point, I decided to stop caring if my boss thought I was nuts. I told him everything. I said I'd heard tapping on the drawer when I stayed late. I said the camera was always getting drained or freezing. He stared at me with a concerned look, like I might have been overworked. He said we could replace the drawer lock. Maybe I wanted to request a new desk. I agreed to try a new lock. The facilities manager came and installed a more robust lock the following day. He tested it, showed me the new key, and I thanked him. That night I set up the camera again with a fresh battery pack. I also hid a second camera across the room in case the first one got messed up. I didn't tell anyone about the second camera. I placed it inside a half-open cabinet with just enough space for the lens to see my desk. Then I left for the night. When I came in on Friday morning, the drawer was unlocked again. The brand new lock was obviously tampered with but not physically damaged. It was just undone. My desk was covered with those same papers. My heart sank. I felt a chill run through my back. I checked the first camera. Battery drained, device off. Then I went to the second camera, hidden in the cabinet. That camera's battery was also dead. I pulled the memory card, shaking my head in disbelief. I walked to my coworker Paul's desk. He was just settling in. I said, "Did you see anyone come in here last night?" He looked at me confused, said no, that he left around 6 p.m. and locked the office as usual. Marcia came in a few minutes later. I asked her the same question. She hadn't come back after hours either. I asked them if they heard any rumors about me or if they thought someone had a grudge. They both said no. They were just as baffled as I was. In a last attempt at logic, I checked the building's hallway cameras with security. The guard let me review the footage from the hallway leading to my office. There was no one entering after 9 p.m. except the cleaning crew. They stayed for 15 minutes, never even went near my office door. Then they left. After that, no movement. The hallway was empty the whole night. That was it. There was no explanation. I felt like I was losing my mind. But the evidence was right there on my desk each morning. It wasn't just a dream. The new lock wasn't enough to stop whatever was happening. I started to wonder if I was dealing with something beyond a simple prank. But I didn't have a rational answer. So far, no documents had been taken, no harm done aside from my shredded nerves. The boss decided to let me move to a different office. He said maybe it would help me relax. We also decided we'd store the most sensitive documents in a company safe for the time being. That way, even if someone opened my drawer, there'd be nothing valuable in there. I packed my stuff and left that desk behind. The new office is down the hall, near the windows. I still keep a lock on my drawers, but I haven't had any strange incidents since moving. It's been 2 weeks and my mornings are a lot calmer. I still think about what happened. Sometimes I catch myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting something to appear behind me. I can't explain it. The cameras never caught anyone. Nothing was stolen. Nobody confessed to messing around. Yet every time I tried to record it, the footage stopped. All I have are those scattered papers and that weird clicking noise in my head. I'm not sure what to believe, but at least it's over for now. If it starts again, I'll be ready to confront it. I keep a small flashlight in my pocket, along with a new recording device. Maybe one day I'll get a real answer. For now, I'll just keep locking my drawer and hope it stays closed when I come back in the morning. I never thought a simple door could make me sweat at 3 in the morning, but it did. It started with a slight rattle, then it escalated into a nightly event that kept me awake and unsettled. I wasn't staying in a haunted house or some creepy old mansion. I was just a regular guy who moved to a different city for work and had to find a cheap place to stay. The house belonged to a couple who seemed decent enough, and I only needed the room for a short period. At first, I thought everything would be fine. Then the doorknob started shaking every night around the same time. And that's when my sleep schedule took a nosedive. I moved in because my company sent me to that city for 3 months. My manager said it would be a quick contract job and then I'd be back home. I checked a few listings online and found this room. The rent was within my budget, and the house was close to the office. The couple who owned the house introduced themselves on the day I arrived. They were polite, but I got the feeling they were a bit distant. The wife showed me around. She pointed out the bathroom, the kitchen, and then my room. It was small, but I didn't need much space. There was a single bed, a small desk, a wardrobe, and a window facing the backyard. She said I could use the kitchen to cook simple meals, and if I had any problems, I could text her or her husband. She also mentioned that they often worked night shifts or late evenings. That explained why they wouldn't be around much. I nodded and thanked her. I just wanted to unpack and rest. My first night was quiet. I came home late after a long day at the new office. I ate a quick dinner at a fast food place nearby, then walked back and went straight to my room. I noticed the hallway was a bit dark, even with the light on. The floor creaked under my feet. I wasn't sure if that was normal or if something needed fixing. I got ready for bed, turned off the lights, and fell asleep. No problems. No weird sounds. I slept straight through until morning. I left for work feeling relieved that the place was peaceful. The couple had already left by the time I woke up, so I didn't see them before heading out. The second night was when I heard it for the first time. It was around 3 in the morning. At least that's what my phone said when I checked it. The doorknob rattled. It sounded like someone outside was trying to turn it back and forth. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I listened for footsteps or voices, but everything else was silent. My throat felt dry. I stared at the door, wondering if maybe the couple had come home and were mistaken about which room was theirs. But it stopped after a few seconds. I got up, turned on the light, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The house was quiet. I closed the door again, locked it, and tried to go back to sleep. My heart was still racing. I told myself it could have been the house settling or some weird draft. I eventually fell asleep again, but felt uneasy when my alarm went off a few hours later. I didn't say anything to the couple the next day. I actually didn't see them. I left for work early, and when I got back, the lights in their bedroom were off, so I assumed they had already left or were sleeping. The third night, it happened again. This time I had trouble falling asleep because I was expecting that noise. I stayed up until midnight reading some files for work. Then I forced myself to turn off the light and try to rest. I woke up abruptly to the same rattling sound, around 3 in the morning again. I felt my stomach clench. My palms got sweaty. I looked at the doorknob. It was clearly moving, but I couldn't see a silhouette under the door. No footsteps, no shadow, no voices. It made me think my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it was definitely moving. After a few seconds, it stopped. I got up, took a deep breath, and decided to throw open the door quickly. Maybe I'd catch whoever it was. I turned the knob fast and pulled the door open. The hallway light was off, and I only saw darkness. My eyes needed a moment to adjust, but I didn't hear anyone running away. I didn't hear doors closing. Nothing. I stepped into the hallway and felt a slight chill. I don't know if it was from the air conditioning or if my body was reacting to adrenaline. I tried the light switch, but the overhead light was out. It had worked the day before. Maybe the bulb died. That pissed me off a bit because it meant I couldn't see the hallway well. I stood there, straining my eyes and ears, but everything was silent. The house felt empty. I went back to my room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were shaking a little. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the house had faulty wiring that caused vibrations. Maybe the doorknob was loose. I even thought about telling the couple about it the next day, but I doubted they'd have a quick fix for a rattling doorknob at 3 in the morning. I tried to calm down and eventually dozed off. But I felt tired at work the next day, and my focus was off. A few nights later, it got worse. I heard whispers outside my door. This was around the same time, maybe a little past 3. I was wide awake because I'd gone to bed early, and my body had adjusted to expecting something weird at that hour. At first it was faint, like someone having a conversation in another room. Then it got clearer, right on the other side of my door. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like 2 distinct voices, a low murmur, as if they were discussing something they didn't want me to hear. I got up and placed my ear against the door. My heart was beating so hard I felt it in my ears. The doorknob didn't move this time, but the whispering continued for a solid minute or 2. I started to think there might be actual people in the hallway messing with me. Could it be burglars or neighbors sneaking in? but nothing else in the house seemed disturbed. The rest of the hallway was always in darkness. The couple was never home around that hour, as far as I knew. After the whispering stopped, I waited a bit, then slowly opened the door. Again, the hallway was empty. I felt a shiver down my spine. I didn't see any open windows, and the front door was locked. I thought about turning on the living room lights, but I didn't want to roam around a house that wasn't mine in the middle of the night. I locked myself back in my room and lay in bed staring at the ceiling until morning. The next day, I decided I couldn't ignore this anymore. I had to talk to the couple. I caught them in the kitchen that evening. They were eating a quick dinner before heading out. I mentioned the rattling doorknob, the whispers, and the strange time that it all occurred. The husband gave me a weird look. Then he glanced at his wife. She looked a bit uncomfortable. She told me that an older relative of hers had passed away in that room some time ago. She said they hadn't had any problems with previous tenants, but maybe the place was carrying some residual energy. She didn't seem alarmed. She spoke calmly, like it was a normal thing. I felt a chill in my arms when she said it. I just stood there, staring. She said I could break the contract if it was bothering me that much, but I couldn't find another cheap place on such short notice. My job wasn't paying for a fancy hotel, and I only had a month left on my assignment. That conversation stuck with me. Learning someone had died in my room made everything worse. I kept replaying it in my head, especially at night when I was trying to sleep. I wondered if there was some strange presence, or if my imagination was going wild. Every time I heard a slight creak or a slight shift in the air, my nerves spiked. My mouth went dry, and I'd sit up, listening for footsteps. Some nights, there were no noises. Other nights, I'd hear the doorknob rattle for a few seconds. I'd sit there, frozen, not sure if I should jump up or pretend I was asleep. On one occasion, I forced myself to open the door immediately after hearing the rattle. Same result. Pitch black hallway, no one there. I could almost feel something watching me, but I never saw anything. My hair stood on end. The tension started affecting my daily life. I'd go to work drained. My coworkers noticed the dark circles under my eyes. They asked if I was sick or if I was having trouble adjusting to the new city. I just told them I was dealing with insomnia because of a new environment. I tried to go out more after work, hoping I'd be so tired that I'd sleep right through the night. Sometimes I stayed at a bar with colleagues until late, but even if I got home after midnight, I'd end up awake at 3, waiting for the doorknob to move or for the whispering to start. It was like my body was expecting it. My heart would pound so loudly I could hear it in my ears before anything even happened. Some nights I dozed off and woke up covered in sweat, not because of heat, but because I was dreaming about someone staring at me from the darkness near the door. I tried to do some small checks around the room. I tightened the screws on the doorknob and tested the lock. I even inspected the floorboards in the hallway. Nothing seemed out of place. Sometimes the corridor light worked. Other times it flickered or was off completely. I mentioned it to the couple in a text, and they said they'd replace the bulb, but it never got fixed. They spent most of their time out of the house, so I guess they forgot about it. I didn't push the issue too hard because I didn't want to seem paranoid. I was also embarrassed to say I felt scared at night because I heard noises. In my mind, it sounded childish. One night near the end of my stay, I heard the whispers again. They were clearer than ever. It was around the same time, just past 3. I had left the lamp on my bedside table turned on because I wanted some light. The voices sounded like they were talking about me. I couldn't catch actual words, but they were definitely whispering in my direction. My heart pounded. My scalp felt tight. I got up, grabbed my phone, and switched on the flashlight. I hesitated for a moment, but I opened the door. Nothing. Just emptiness. But the whispers continued for a few seconds even after I opened the door. It was like they were coming from the walls or from behind the thin air. Then they faded. I looked around the corridor, shining my phone's light in every corner. I walked to the living room, checked the locks on the front door, and stood there for a moment, feeling my breathing go fast. The house was cold. Or maybe I was just shaking too much. I went back to my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed until sunrise. By the last week of my contract, I was counting down the days. I just wanted to leave that house. My job was almost done, and I planned to move back to my city the moment I signed the final paperwork. The couple never mentioned the noises again. They kept to themselves, and we barely crossed paths. I avoided staying in the house during my free time. I felt safer at cafes or in my car, but I had to sleep there. I had already paid for the month, and I didn't have the money for a hotel. Each night I'd lock the door, leave a small lamp on, and hope the doorknob stayed still. Some nights it did, some nights it didn't. On my last morning, I packed my suitcase before dawn. I hardly slept. I looked around the room one final time. It felt like an ordinary room with pale walls and a single bed. There wasn't anything sinister about the furniture or the window, but knowing I had spent several nights wide awake listening for that doorknob to rattle or those whispers to start up made me want to leave as fast as I could. I left the key on the kitchen table and texted the couple that I was moving out. I didn't stay to say goodbye. I walked straight out the front door and didn't look back. Once I got in my car, I felt my shoulders relax. My heart rate slowed down. That was the end of my stay in that strange house. I still don't know what caused the doorknob to move or the whispers I heard. I have no proof that anything supernatural was going on. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe the older relatives passing in that room left some trace that disturbed my sleep. All I know is that it happened every night around 3, and it felt real enough to keep me up and on edge. I told a few people about it afterward, but most just laughed and said I was too stressed. I've chosen to let it go. But anytime I think about that city, I remember those sounds on the other side of the door in the middle of the night. And I'm glad I never have to sleep in that room again. I never expected to find anything strange under my staircase. It was just a cramped space filled with boxes I hadn't touched since the day we moved in. But a few weeks ago, I decided I needed to clear out the clutter and maybe figure out if there was anything worth keeping. I started dragging out boxes, opening them, and checking for old junk that I could throw away or donate. That's when I found the pair of small, worn-out white shoes. They looked old, made of some kind of faded leather with yellowish stains and cracked edges. They were obviously meant for someone with really small feet. I had no idea who they belonged to. I asked my wife, my parents, and even a friend who had helped us move. Nobody recognized them. It was weird, but I shrugged it off at first. I put the shoes aside and finished my cleaning. That was the beginning of the most unsettling experience I've ever had. The first night something happened, I was in bed around 3 in the morning, half asleep, when I heard a light tapping on the stairs. It wasn't loud. It almost sounded like soft footsteps, but they were too gentle for an adult. It was more like a quick, light shuffle, then a pause, then a few more steps. My first thought was that someone was trying to sneak around the house. My second thought was that maybe I was dreaming. I sat up in bed and listened. My heart thumped a bit because it didn't sound like normal house creaking. It sounded deliberate, like somebody was walking slowly on each step. I got up, checked the hallway, and found nothing. The house was still. I went back to bed feeling uneasy. The next day, I didn't bring it up to my wife. I figured she'd tease me about letting a weird old pair of shoes get in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about them, though. I had placed them on a table in the living room, planning to ask around more. I still wanted to figure out who they belonged to. By evening, I went to the table to show them to my wife, and they weren't there. I found them on the floor near the foot of the stairs. I stood there for a good 20 seconds, just staring. I tried to recall if I had moved them. I was pretty sure I left them on the table. I asked my wife if she had moved them. She said no. I asked my brother, who was visiting at the time, if he moved them as a joke. He just shrugged, said he hadn't touched them. I put the shoes back on the table. That night, around 4 in the morning, I woke up thirsty and went to get some water. The house was dark, with just a bit of moonlight coming in through the living room window. I walked past the staircase and paused when I saw a brief flicker of movement. It was like something small zipped around the corner toward the kitchen. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" No response. I turned on the kitchen light. Nothing. I checked the living room. It was empty. The shoes were on the table exactly where I had left them. I told myself I was tired and that my eyes were playing tricks on me. The next few days were quiet. No strange sounds at night. No odd movements. I started to think maybe I had just been jumpy. But then, on a Wednesday night, I had trouble sleeping. I lay awake until about 3 in the morning. That's when I heard the steps on the staircase again. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. It sounded like someone walking carefully, trying not to make noise. My bedroom door was open, and I could see a bit of the staircase through the hallway. The lights were off, so it was hard to see clearly, but I could make out a shape moving up the steps. It was low to the ground, almost like a small silhouette. Then it just vanished into the darkness. My chest felt tight. I got up, walked to the staircase, and turned on the light. There was no one there. The house felt cold. I checked all the doors. Everything was locked. I decided I had to mention this to my wife, but I didn't want to scare her. The next morning, I asked if she had heard anything at night. She said she slept straight through. I told her I thought I heard footsteps, maybe even saw something. She shrugged and said, "Probably the pipes or the wood settling. Houses do that." I didn't push it, but inside, I knew what I heard was not just old pipes. That afternoon, I went back to the staircase closet. I pulled out every single box, rummaged through them, and checked every item to see if there was anything related to the shoes. I found a lot of random stuff. An old lamp, some photo frames, a few Christmas ornaments, and a bunch of books. Nothing that explained the shoes. I felt frustrated. I ended up placing the shoes on a shelf near the front door, thinking maybe someone in the household was messing with me. Around 1 in the morning that night, I was still awake, watching TV in the living room, when I heard a slight scuffing sound. I muted the TV and listened. The soft footsteps traveled from the hallway to the kitchen, then back toward the stairs. It was so faint I could barely be sure I heard it. I got up slowly. My heart was pounding and my mouth felt dry. I crept toward the hallway. The sound stopped. I flicked on the light, half expecting to see someone. Nothing. I glanced at the shelf near the front door. The shoes were gone. My stomach twisted. I walked into the kitchen, turning on the lights as I went. There they were, sitting near the doorway to the backyard. They were pointed toward the door, as if someone had just taken them off. I felt uneasy, almost dizzy. I picked them up, put them in a drawer in the living room cabinet, and locked it. I told myself it had to be a prank. Maybe my brother had a spare key and was sneaking in at night. Maybe someone thought it would be funny to make me think the shoes were moving on their own. But part of me knew it didn't add up. The house never showed any sign of forced entry. Nobody else reported anything strange except for my wife, who one day said she heard light tapping near the stairs when she was cleaning. But she dismissed it as a random noise. She didn't seem bothered. The next week, I started waking up more often, around 3 or 4 in the morning. Each time I heard those soft footsteps on the stairs. Sometimes I would hear a quiet scraping sound, like something being dragged across a step. I couldn't figure out how it was happening. I even set up my phone to record audio one night. I placed it near the staircase and left it running while I slept. The next morning I listened to the recording. I heard the typical nighttime background noises, the fridge humming, the air conditioner clicking on and off, a few random creaks. Then, about 3 hours in, there were definitely faint footsteps on the stairs. Then a pause, then a quick series of steps, as if someone ran up the rest of the way. My heart raced as I listened. It wasn't super loud, but it was distinct enough that I could tell it wasn't just random house noises. I showed the recording to my wife. She admitted it sounded odd, but she still offered logical explanations. She said maybe it was an animal in the walls or something like that. I wasn't convinced. She suggested I talk to someone about the history of the house. So I went and checked with the real estate agent, just in case there was some record of previous owners leaving behind personal items. The agent said the house had gone through several owners, but they had no specific details about old belongings. They just said it was an older place, so old items left behind wouldn't be unusual. That didn't help much. I got back home and went straight to the cabinet where I had locked the shoes. I opened it. They were still there. I took them out and examined them again. The leather felt stiff. The stains were still in the same spots. I smelled them, and they had that musty old odor, like something that had been stored in a damp place for a long time. I set them on the coffee table and stared for a while, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. That night I fell asleep early. At around 3:30 in the morning I jolted awake. No reason, just a burst of adrenaline. My heart was racing. I listened. Silence. After a minute I thought I heard a light clicking sound near my bedroom door. I got up, walked to the hallway, and flicked on the light. Then I heard a different noise downstairs, kind of like a shuffle. I crept down slowly. My palms were sweating. My throat felt tight. When I reached the living room, I noticed the shoes were no longer on the coffee table. They were on the floor, right at the base of the stairs. They were facing the steps, almost lined up perfectly. It felt like someone had placed them there intentionally. I stood there breathing hard, trying to decide if I should check the closet under the stairs or just go back to bed. After a moment, I walked to the closet, opened it, and shone a flashlight inside. Nothing but boxes. The next few days, I couldn't focus on anything. I was jumpy at work. I kept replaying the noises in my head. One evening, I tried moving the shoes out to the garage. I put them in a box, sealed it, and put the box on a high shelf. I told myself, problem solved. They're out of the house. That night, I heard the steps again, around 4 in the morning. I ran downstairs, and the front door was locked, windows all shut. The garage door was also locked. I went into the garage, opened the box, and saw the shoes exactly where I'd left them. It felt like they were mocking me by staying silent during the day and showing up in a new spot at night. Except this time, they were still in the box. That only confused me more. About a week later, my wife said she was going to visit her parents for a few days. She asked if I wanted to come along, but I said I had too much work to do. Part of me was relieved because I wanted to investigate more without worrying her. The night she left, I stayed up late. I turned off all the lights around midnight and waited, sitting on the living room couch. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the first creak on the stairs. It was faint. Then a soft thud, like a footstep. I stood, heart pounding, but I stayed where I was. Another step. Another. Then silence. I took slow, careful steps toward the stairs, keeping my eyes on each stair. The hair on my neck stood up. My arms felt tense. I reached the first step and waited. Nothing moved. I climbed halfway up, looking over the railing. I didn't see anyone. I heard a small scuff right behind me near the bottom of the stairs. My stomach lurched. I whirled around. I saw something dark dart across the hallway. I ran down, flicked on the light, and saw the shoes in the middle of the hallway. They weren't there before. I felt my chest tighten. I picked them up, walked straight to the kitchen and tossed them on the floor. I stood there staring at them. My breathing was loud in my ears. Nothing happened for a solid minute. I decided to do something drastic. I grabbed a small padlock from my toolbox, went to the hallway closet, and pulled out a plastic bin. I put the shoes in the bin, closed it, and snapped the padlock. I shook the bin to make sure it was secure. Then I pushed the bin into the back corner of the closet. After that, I locked the closet door as well. I double-checked all the locks. I felt shaky, but I told myself that was it. I went to bed, exhausted. I woke up around 8 in the morning, stiff from a poor night's sleep. I opened the closet to see if the bin was still in place. It was. The padlock was intact. I pulled the bin out and unlocked it. The shoes were still inside. I felt an odd sense of relief. I carried the bin to my car, intending to drive to a storage unit and leave it there. Right before I started the car, I paused. I had this strong feeling that if I removed them from the house, I might not solve anything. I might just bring the problem elsewhere. But I also didn't want them with me anymore. In the end, I drove to a local thrift store. I know it sounds irresponsible, but I couldn't handle it anymore. I dropped the bin off with some other items. The clerk didn't pay much attention. He gave me a receipt for the donation and I drove away. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but I was also worried. I was worried about the possibility of hearing those footsteps again or seeing the shoes reappear at the bottom of my stairs. I thought maybe I'd see them back at the house the next day waiting for me, but they never came back. The house felt calmer, and the footsteps stopped. I don't know who's going to end up with those shoes. I don't know if anyone else will notice anything weird about them. All I know is that after I got rid of them, those nights of soft footsteps and quick shadows ended. No one in my family ever mentioned hearing strange noises after that. I feel uneasy talking about it, but at least it's gone. Even now, I sometimes wake up around 3 or 4 in the morning and hold my breath, listening for any sign of that faint tapping on the stairs. So far, I haven't heard anything. The shoes are gone, and nothing else has shown up under that staircase. The boxes are all in order. I've checked them a few times just to be sure. Life went back to normal, and I try not to think about it too much. But I'll never forget the night I saw that small shape move across my hallway. And I'll never forget the feeling of finding those shoes in a new spot every time I turned around. It felt like a slow, creeping invasion of my space. All I wanted was for my house to be quiet and predictable again. That's exactly what happened after I removed the shoes. Now I just hope they stay gone for good. I never worried about where I parked. I used to pull up in front of the pharmacy, switch off the engine, and hurry inside. Then I'd come back out, get in my car, and drive away without a second thought. That changed the day I heard a whistling noise right behind me. At first I thought it was just in my head, but it kept happening, and now I can't shake this tight feeling in my stomach every time I reach for the car door. I'm a pretty average guy. I live alone, I work 9 to 5, and I don't spend much time thinking about the supernatural or anything weird like that. I prefer sticking to practical concerns. But over the last few weeks, this strange whistling has messed with my usual calm. I want to explain exactly what happened step by step so I don't leave out any details or start imagining things that aren't there. I always park in the same spot, right in front of the pharmacy. There's a convenience store next door and a few parallel parking spaces along the curb. It's never too busy on that street, so I can usually grab the same space without a problem. The first time I heard the whistling, I had just closed the driver's door. I remember reaching over to my passenger seat to pick up a receipt. While I leaned over, I heard a short, sharp whistle behind me. It sounded close, uncomfortably close. I froze for a second. My first thought was that someone was messing with me. I turned around, but nobody was in the back seat. The doors were locked. No one was outside my window either. Nothing. I felt a weird chill on my arms, but I told myself it was a random noise outside. That night I didn't think about it much. It's easy to dismiss a single strange sound. Could have been the wind through a crack, or maybe some random street noise. But the second time it happened, it was much louder. Let me walk you through that day because it's still fresh in my memory. It was a Saturday morning. I had just finished picking up some cold medicine at the pharmacy. Same parking spot, same routine. I got in and pulled the door shut. The whistle came at me again from right over my shoulder like someone was leaning in. I jerked forward and nearly dropped my car keys. I twisted around so fast my neck cracked a little. The back seat was empty just like before. I looked at the locks on the doors. Everything was still locked from the inside. I even reached behind me, feeling around as if there might be some hidden speaker or device. Nothing. Just the fabric of my seat and the slight smell of old coffee from a spill the previous week. I felt my heart pounding. My palms got sweaty. I told myself I was imagining things, but the sound was too clear. It wasn't a faint hiss or a breeze. It was a definite human whistle, like someone trying to get my attention. I sat there for a minute, scanning the street, checking my mirrors, even rolling down the window to see if anyone was outside. People passed by on the sidewalk, but no one was looking my way. Eventually, I started the car and drove home. I kept thinking about that sound the entire drive. Over the next few days, I avoided that parking spot. I'd park around the corner or a little further down the road. But one afternoon, I found the ideal spot again, right out front. I was in a hurry, so I ignored my nerves and pulled in. That day, I didn't hear the whistle. Nothing unusual happened. I started thinking I had overreacted. Maybe I was stressed, hearing odd things, or just on edge. I decided to let the whole thing go. But a week later, on a Thursday night, I needed to grab some vitamins and a few groceries. It was already dark, but the pharmacy was still open. I pulled up to my usual spot again, feeling a bit uneasy. I got out, locked the car, and checked the back seat before heading inside. Everything was normal. I grabbed my stuff, chatted with the cashier for a minute, and then walked back outside. I approached the car slowly, glancing around the street. Only a couple of cars passed by. The sidewalks were nearly empty. I opened the driver's door and got in. For a few seconds, it was quiet. Then I heard the whistle, long and high-pitched, right at my ear level. I panicked. I spun around so fast I banged my shoulder on the steering wheel. The back seat was empty again. I leaned forward to look in the rear footwell. Nothing. I opened the back door, got out and checked under the seats. Nothing at all. My heart thudded. My hands shook. I could feel the rush of adrenaline making my face hot. It wasn't a cold sensation. It was more like a surge of heat that made me sweat. I backed away from the car, stared at it, then looked around the parking space. The street was dimly lit, but I didn't see anyone nearby. There wasn't a single person standing close enough to whistle in my ear like that. I stayed there for maybe 2 minutes, trying to decide if I should just walk home and come back for the car later. In the end, I forced myself back into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and started the engine. I tried to steady my breathing. Then I drove home, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, convinced I would see a face suddenly appear behind me. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining the whistle. I replayed it in my mind, thinking about every detail. It was definitely human. There was no mistake about that. It had the same pitch and tone as a person whistling through their lips. It reminded me of someone trying to get my attention, like, "Hey, you." I couldn't figure it out. I checked my car thoroughly the next day, looking for hidden devices, a loose vent, or anything that could produce that sound. I found nothing that made sense. I started developing a habit. Every time I got in my car, I'd quickly glance in the back seat. Sometimes I'd even say something out loud like, "Okay, is anyone here?" I felt stupid talking to an empty car, but I needed to reassure myself. For a while, I avoided that pharmacy. I went to another one across town, even though it was less convenient. But eventually, I had to return. My prescription was there, and I needed it refilled. One evening, after work, I drove straight to the usual spot in front of the pharmacy. My plan was to park somewhere else, but all the other spaces were taken. The only open spot was my old one. I pulled in, feeling nervous. I took a deep breath, then got out, locked the car, and hurried inside. I did what I needed to do, grabbed a few items, and paid at the counter. I even struck up a conversation with the cashier just to delay going back. After a few minutes, I stepped outside, and the street looked as quiet as ever. A street lamp buzzed softly. I walked to my car, keys in hand, heart pounding. When I got in, I kept an eye on the back seat. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then I thought, maybe it won't happen this time. Right when I felt a small relief, I heard it. This time, the whistle was so piercing that I felt the vibration in my ears. My chest tightened. I whipped around, my muscles tense. Still empty. No one was there. But the sound had been so loud, I felt a chill in my spine. I felt a wave of nausea. My breath came in short gasps. I kept looking around, scanning every corner of the car. Then I flicked on the interior light. I glanced at the door locks. They were all engaged. I cracked open the driver's window and looked outside. There wasn't anyone standing by the car. No one was across the street. No one was on the sidewalk. I was alone. I tried to calm myself by turning on the radio. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt. I drove off, checking my mirrors every few seconds. My mouth was dry and I kept swallowing. Every small noise, like the engine shifting gears or a bump in the road, made me jump. That night I stayed up late trying to make sense of this. I searched online for any explanation. Odd air pressure in the car, mechanical issues, pranks, or something else. I couldn't find anything that matched what I was experiencing. The whistle always sounded like a person, always behind me, always at the moment I closed the door. It never happened while I was outside the car or once I was on the road, only right after I closed the driver's door. Over the next few days, I asked a friend to ride with me. I wanted to see if having another person in the passenger seat would change anything. But I didn't want to look like a complete lunatic, so I just said I needed company to grab some stuff at the pharmacy. We parked in that spot. I closed my door, he closed his. Nothing happened. No whistle. I felt relieved but also frustrated, like the car was toying with me. My friend never heard a thing, so I didn't bring it up. We went home and that was it. A couple of days later I had to go back alone. My friend was busy. The parking spot was open as usual. This time I sat in the car for a while before closing the door, just listening. The street noise outside was normal. Cars passing, a faint breeze, maybe the hum of the traffic light. I took a deep breath and shut the door. Immediately I heard the whistle again. It was short, just one sharp note, but it was right in my ear. I jumped and felt a jolt through my body. I scrambled to open the door and leaned out, looking all around. Not a soul. I slammed the door, locked everything, started the engine, and sped off. My heart was in my throat the entire drive home. At this point, I became paranoid. I cleaned out every inch of the car, looking for something hidden that could produce that noise. I even checked under the hood. I found nothing out of the ordinary. No weird electronics, no holes in the seats, no sign of tampering. The sound was definitely coming from inside the cabin, right behind my head. It was enough to make my hair stand on end just thinking about it. I started imagining the worst-case scenario, that one day I'd hear the whistle, turn around and see someone or something sitting there. The idea of looking into the rear-view mirror and seeing a shape gave me a knot in my stomach. I tried to calm myself by thinking it was impossible. The doors were always locked. My car alarm worked fine. There was no logical way someone could sneak in. Yet I kept hearing it. One afternoon, I decided to record it. I took my phone out, hit the record button, and set it up on the dashboard. Then I closed the door. I heard the whistle, clear as day. I froze for a second, then picked up my phone to play back the recording. All I heard was the sound of the door closing, then a bit of static. There was no whistle on the recording, even though I'd heard it with my own ears. That made my stomach twist. I had no way to prove it to anyone. It was like it existed only for me. Since then, I've changed my routine. I've stopped parking in front of the pharmacy entirely. I park at the far end of the lot behind the building now. It's a bit of a walk, but I don't care. I'm trying to break this pattern, hoping the noise will stop if I don't return to that exact spot. So far, it seems to be working. I haven't heard it again, but I feel a lingering tension every time I get into my car. My eyes always flick to the rearview mirror as soon as I close the door. I can't help it. The thought that scares me the most is that this might not be over. I keep wondering if one day I'll slip up and park in front of the pharmacy again. Maybe I'll be in a rush, or maybe the back lot will be full. If I do, will the whistle start again? Will it be louder? Will I finally see someone behind me? That possibility keeps me on edge. Even now, I feel a nervous energy when I think about it. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the fear doesn't feel silly when I'm actually in the driver's seat, hearing that whistle in my ear. My muscles tense, and my mind races. The reality of it is so strong that I'm not sure I'll ever fully get over it. For now, I'm sticking to other parking spots, avoiding that stretch of curb in front of the pharmacy. If this ever happens again, I'm not sure how I'll handle it. I just know I don't want to turn around one day and find some strange figure sitting in the back seat staring at me. That thought alone makes my chest tighten and my breath catch. I'm hoping that's the end of it. But part of me stays alert. always listening for that whistle. It's a sound I can't forget. If it ever comes back, I don't know what I'll do. For now, I keep my doors locked and my eyes on the rearview mirror. I guess that's all I can do. I remember the first time I noticed the swing moving by itself. It was late, around midnight, and I was standing at the kitchen window. The yard was dark, except for a little motion sensor light near the back door. There was no breeze, no rustling of leaves. The air felt thick and still. Then I saw the seat of that old swing shifting back and forth at a slow, steady pace. It looked normal at a glance, but something about the movement felt deliberate. It wasn't random. It wasn't swaying side to side. It was almost as if someone was sitting there pumping their legs just enough to create that gentle motion. My gut tightened. I couldn't look away. I stood there for a few seconds, just staring. My first thought was that the swing was loose. Maybe I had fixed one side tighter than the other. But I had hung that swing with care months ago and I'd checked all the bolts. I knew that thing was secure. I tried to explain it to myself anyway. Then I realized my wife was behind me. She had come into the kitchen for water and she was standing about 3 feet away, just quietly watching me watch the swing. She asked, "Do you see it moving?" I nodded. She leaned closer to the window, focusing her eyes. Then she said, "It's going too steady." She was right. It was too steady. I felt a jolt in my chest. I decided I had to check it out. I told her I'd be right back, slipped on my shoes, and walked outside. The grass was cool under my feet. There was no wind. The tree branches above didn't sway. The leaves were almost motionless, but the swing was moving in that slow, consistent rhythm. When I got closer, I heard a faint squeak from the chains, like when you have a little weight on the seat. It sounded soft, but it was there. My heart started thumping harder. My chest felt tight. A bead of sweat ran down the side of my face. I took another step, then another. As soon as I reached out to touch the chain, the swing's movement faded. It didn't drift and sway for a while. It stopped faster than I expected. It felt unnatural, like the momentum had been cut off by some outside force. I stood there with my hand on the chain, not sure what to do next. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything beyond my own pulse in my ears. I looked around the yard. Everything looked normal. A few scattered garden chairs, a small shed to my right, and a patch of flowers my wife had planted. Nothing was moving. Nothing else looked strange. I went back inside. I could feel my arm hairs standing on end. My wife asked me if I saw anything. I told her I didn't see a person and I didn't feel a breeze. We tried to laugh it off, but it didn't feel funny. I locked the back door. We both went to bed, but I had a hard time sleeping. My mind kept replaying the image of that steady swing. Over the next few nights, I kept checking the window around the same time. Sometimes the swing was still. Sometimes it rocked so slightly that it could have been my imagination. But on the 5th night, I saw it moving again in that very distinct way. It was swaying with a clear pattern, forward and back, like a calm push from invisible legs. I watched for a while, feeling uneasy. There was no breeze again. No reason for it to move. I felt a chill on my arms. My pulse sped up. I decided to investigate again. When I stepped outside, I felt the same heavy silence. I heard my shoes on the grass. I heard my own breathing, but I didn't hear wind through the branches. I walked up to the swing, and again it slowed down, almost like something jumped off it. My wife was in the kitchen this time, watching from the window. I waved at her to signal everything was okay, but I didn't feel okay. I felt a twist in my stomach. I grabbed the seat and looked underneath it. The wood felt normal. The seat wasn't cracked or warped. The hardware was tight. I let it go. The seat just hung there, perfectly still now. I spent a few minutes scanning the yard. Nothing. I looked at the big tree overhead. The bark was rough and peeling in places, but nothing seemed out of place. I checked the branch that held the chain. It looked sturdy. Nothing weird about it. I stood there, waiting, as if I might catch it starting up on its own. It didn't. So I went back inside, feeling restless. A few days went by without any strange movement. I thought maybe it was over. Then, a week later, I woke up around 2 a.m. I don't remember why. I just felt anxious, so I got up to get some water. As I passed the window, I saw the swing again. This time it was moving a bit faster than before. Back and forth, back and forth. I felt my heart pound. My mouth went dry. I hated that feeling of not knowing what I was looking at. It wasn't a typical fear where I'd think some intruder was out there. I saw nothing and no one, which almost felt worse. I decided to get a flashlight and check once more. I walked out, shining the beam around the yard. The grass glimmered with dew. The beam hit the trunk of the tree. It was just a tree. Then I aimed at the swing. The seat was swinging forward and back with that light squeak. I could see the chain links moving. I didn't see any shape pushing it. I walked closer. As soon as I reached a certain distance, maybe 6 or 7 feet away, it slowed down. There wasn't a gradual deceleration like normal swings do. It felt abrupt, like a car gently tapping its brakes. My breath caught in my throat. My chest felt tight. I crouched low and shone the light under the seat. Nothing there. I stood up and moved the flashlight around, but there wasn't anyone hiding behind the tree or in the bushes. The yard was wide open. There was nowhere to hide except the shed, which was all the way in the corner. That was locked, and I knew it. I checked the door to confirm. Still locked. No sign of forced entry. I walked back inside, locked the door behind me, and tried to calm down. My wife asked if I was okay. I told her it was the same. She didn't sleep well either. One afternoon, I decided to inspect the entire swing set from top to bottom, in daylight. I took a ladder, climbed up to check the branch. The branch was thick and stable. The chain was secure. I tested the seat, tried swinging it on my own to see if it had any weird balance issues, but it behaved normally in daylight. It slowed down the way a swing should when I stopped pushing it. I pressed on every link of the chain. Everything felt solid. There was nothing loose, nothing rigged. I tried to replicate the slow forward and back movement. It took a gentle push, but it matched what I'd seen at night. A normal swing can do that, of course, but not without some push. The wind can do it, but there was no wind on those nights. I couldn't explain it. I started feeling uneasy when the sun went down. I'd be in the living room trying to relax, but my mind would wander to the yard. I'd think about that swing. I'd tell myself it was probably some draft of air or a weird microcurrent of wind. But I'd seen the complete stillness around it. One time I even stepped outside and observed the leaves. They didn't move at all, not even a flutter. Yet the swing was in motion. It didn't make sense. My wife and I started joking about it during the day, but at night the jokes stopped. We both felt tense. Neither of us said we thought it was a ghost or a spirit, but we both hinted at something we couldn't define. One night, she said, "It's like someone's playing on it, and they don't want to be seen." She used the word "like," but not as a metaphor, just a comparison to an actual person. I felt a lump in my throat when she said that. I had thought the same thing. We started experimenting. We left lights on in the yard to see if that would keep it from moving. For a couple of nights, the swing stayed still. Then it happened again. Lights on or off didn't matter. We tried setting up my phone on a tripod near the window to record. I watched the footage in the morning. For 3 hours, the swing was still. Then suddenly, it began that slow, rhythmic motion. It moved for about 10 minutes. Then it stopped. I saw nothing else on camera. There was no figure, no silhouette. The seat just started moving on its own, then stopped. Watching the recording made me feel more uneasy. This wasn't my imagination. It wasn't me shaking with nerves in the middle of the night. There was actual footage. My wife watched it too. She just went quiet afterward. She said she felt chills up her arms. I felt the same. Over the next few weeks, it continued. Not every night, but once or twice a week. Sometimes we'd see it around midnight. Sometimes it would be closer to 2 a.m. Always the same pattern, slow, purposeful swinging, then a quick stop once we got close. One night I stayed in the yard for almost 2 hours, sitting in a chair facing the swing, waiting. I brought a cup of coffee, my phone, a jacket. I sat there, listening to the crickets. The swing didn't budge. I got tired. I walked inside. Within about 30 minutes, my wife shouted from the window that it was moving again. I rushed outside. It slowed to a stop the moment I stepped onto the grass. I know how it sounds. I know it seems ridiculous or paranoid. But I was there. I saw it. My wife saw it too. It started to feel like a presence that had its own schedule, its own sense of play. I never felt outright threatened. I felt spooked and uneasy, but not like I was in danger. It was more the fact that it wouldn't let me see it. I felt watched, or maybe avoided. It was a stressful feeling. My heartbeat would spike every time I saw the seat in motion. I'd break out in a cold sweat when I stepped outside. My hands would shake a bit, but it wasn't the kind of fear where I expected a physical attack. It was the fear of the unknown, of not knowing what was out there or why it was happening. My wife eventually suggested we remove the swing. She said maybe we should just take it down, store it in the shed. I considered it, but something in me resisted. I don't know if I was curious or stubborn. Part of me wanted to solve the mystery. Another part of me worried that removing it would just move the problem somewhere else. I didn't want to provoke anything. So we left it. We tried ignoring it. We stopped checking the window every night. We stopped walking outside to investigate. But every now and then we'd glance out the window and see it moving. Sometimes it moved just a few inches. Other times it swung wide enough for the chain to make that familiar squeak, like it was holding weight. We never caught anyone in the yard, and we live in a quiet neighborhood. We have a fence. No one had been sneaking in. We would have seen footprints or heard something. I've got a pretty good ear, and the yard is relatively small. There's nowhere to hide without someone noticing. At one point I asked my wife if she thought we should call someone. She asked, "Who would we call? The police? An investigator? They'd think we're nuts." So we didn't call anyone. We just lived with it. Weeks turned into months. The swing would move, then it would stop over and over. Sometimes it wouldn't move for days. Then it would start again. We began to accept it as part of our routine, even though it still made us uncomfortable. I tried not to watch it every night. I started going to bed earlier. If my wife spotted it, she wouldn't always tell me. She said it was better if we didn't give it too much attention, but she wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't sleeping well either. We'd be jumpy at small noises, or the squeak of a door hinge in the house. We started turning on more lights indoors as if that helped us feel safer. We never talked about removing the swing again, though. It remained there under that tree. Eventually, I tried a more direct approach. One night, I went to the swing while it was moving. I stood just a foot away from it, watching it sway. My pulse pounded in my head. My hands felt clammy. The seat rocked in front of me, forward and back, as if someone sat there. I said, "Who's there?" out loud. I got no response. I reached for the seat and it stopped. That was it. It felt like if there was something on the swing, it slipped away the moment I spoke. I turned around, scanning the yard with my flashlight. Nothing. Then I walked inside. We never figured out who or what was causing the swing to move. It kept happening, off and on, but not every single night. My wife and I talked about possibilities sometimes, but we never found a clear explanation. We started calling it our nighttime visitor. We didn't treat it like a playful joke anymore. It was just the name we gave to whatever was out there, using the swing when the air was still and silent. These days, I try not to dwell on it. I go to bed earlier, and if I hear a faint squeaking noise from outside, I ignore it. I keep the curtains closed more often. My wife does the same, but sometimes we open them and see the swing in motion. I can't deny it. It's still there, still moving in that deliberate way, stopping when one of us approaches. I have no evidence of anything else. There's just the swing, an empty seat, and the sound of the chains. I feel uneasy every time. My heart beats faster. My breath comes quicker. My skin feels cold. But we don't see a shape, and we don't hear a voice. It's just an invisible presence that uses our swing at night and doesn't want us to catch it. We leave it alone. It leaves us alone. We're stuck with this strange, unexplained situation in our yard. I've learned to live with that tension even though it makes me nervous. I still don't have an answer. Maybe I never will. But that's the story. That's what's happening with the swing under my tree. And unless something changes, that's how it's going to stay. I still feel a jolt in my stomach when I think about what happened. I've always kept a full glass of water on my nightstand. Last month, I woke up one morning and noticed that the glass was half empty. I checked my sheets to see if I had spilled anything. They were dry. I checked the floor around the nightstand. Also dry. It didn't make any sense. I sleep like a rock, and I almost never get up in the middle of the night. Yet the water was missing. I tried ignoring it at first. Maybe I was half asleep one night and drank some without realizing it. But the same thing happened again. I put a full glass down before bed, and in the morning, there was less water in it. No splashes, no dampness, nothing. The amount of water that disappeared was always about half the glass. It kept happening, and I began to feel uneasy. I decided to run a test. I put a teaspoon of sugar in the water before going to sleep. I stirred it for a moment and tasted a bit to be sure it was sweet. I left the glass on my nightstand and went to bed. The next morning, the glass was half empty, just like before. But there was no sugary residue on the bottom. The water that was left didn't taste sweet. It was just plain water. That made my chest tighten. My scalp felt prickly. I couldn't explain it. I got suspicious that I might be sleepwalking. I've never had a history of it, but I also know that people can do strange things in the middle of the night. So I bought a small camera. It's one of those simple night vision security cameras you can set on a shelf. I aimed it at my bed and the nightstand, hoping to catch myself in the act if I was indeed the one responsible. The first few nights I recorded, I didn't see anything unusual. I'd watch the footage on my laptop the next day. It was me, under the covers, not moving except for the occasional shift. The water level remained untouched. I started to think maybe it was just random. Then, on the fourth night of filming, the glass was half empty when I woke up. My stomach twisted when I saw it. I felt this strange tension in my arms like I was bracing for something. I hurried to check the camera footage. I watched myself sleeping. The clock in the corner of the screen read 2:04 a.m. I saw my shoulders stir. I watched myself sit up. I saw my eyes open. That alone was disturbing because I never wake up like that. Then, I reached for the glass of water. My movements were slow, but I didn't look groggy. I looked focused. I brought the glass up like I was offering it to someone, but there was no one there. I didn't see a shape, a figure, nothing. I was alone in the shot. My arm was extended, holding the glass in the air. Then the recording glitched. It froze for about 2 seconds. When it came back, the clock read 2:05 a.m., and I was lying back down, asleep. The glass was back on the nightstand, half empty. I stared at the screen, my heart thudding in my chest. I replayed that portion over and over, but the glitch happened at the same spot every time. There was no audio, so I didn't hear anything. It was just me, making that offering motion, then a cut in the footage, then me lying down again. I felt uneasy all day. My palms were sweaty and my neck felt stiff. I kept replaying the video in my head. I found myself rubbing my eyes, trying to make sense of it. I tried telling myself it was a camera error. But that didn't explain why I lifted the glass like that. It didn't explain the missing water. That night I decided to adjust the camera angle. I wanted a slightly wider shot to see if anything else in the room might be captured. I went to bed with this tight feeling in my gut. My eyes stayed open for a while as I stared at the ceiling. I remember hearing my own breath, slow and heavy. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, the glass was half empty again. My chest felt tight. I could feel sweat at my hairline as I reached for my laptop. When I opened the footage, I felt my jaw tense. The new angle showed more of my room. At 2:11 a.m., I saw myself sit up again. This time, I glanced around the room. My eyes were wide open. I could see the reflection from the night vision in my pupils. I reached for the glass. I held it out to the side of the bed like I was offering it to someone standing there. Then the same thing happened. The footage froze for a moment. When it resumed, I was under the covers again. Half the water was gone. I didn't like the way this made me feel. I was warm all over, like my body was on alert. My mind was racing. I watched the rest of the footage, but I didn't see any other motion. I didn't see anyone else. It was just me in that bed, apparently handing water to nobody. I decided to talk to my neighbor, who's a friend of mine. I showed him the video. He watched it with this blank expression. He rewound it and watched it again. He asked if I faked it somehow. I told him no. I asked him if he saw anything strange before the glitch, but he said it just looked like I was offering the glass to thin air. Then he started looking uncomfortable. He suggested I see a doctor, maybe get a sleep study. That evening, I moved the camera again. I wanted to see if it would capture any silhouettes near the window or door. I also decided to put an extra lamp in the room, turned to a dim setting, just to get a slightly better view on the recording. I filled the glass with water right before bed, set it on the nightstand, and pressed record on the camera. I felt restless. My legs were tense, and my shoulders kept bunching up. But eventually, I dozed off. In the morning, the glass was half empty again. I almost didn't want to look at the footage, but I had to. At 3:02 a.m., I saw myself sit up. The lamp cast enough light to show details of my face. I looked calm, awake, and I was staring at the foot of the bed. Then I turned to the nightstand, picked up the glass, and held it out. I moved my mouth like I was saying something, but there was no audio. Then I tilted the glass forward as if pouring it into something or someone's mouth. The entire glass went vertical, yet only half was gone. Then I placed the glass back. I lay down. A few seconds later, the camera flashed. The time jumped to 3:03 a.m., and I was completely still under the blankets. I didn't feel hungry that morning. I felt wired and shaky. I kept replaying that footage. No matter how I looked at it, it seemed like I was offering water to an invisible presence and only half of it disappeared. It was the same pattern every night. Everything about it made me feel tense. My breathing would speed up whenever I thought of it. I decided to stay awake the next night and see if I could catch myself in the act. So I drank some coffee in the evening. I had a bright lamp on in the living room. I stayed on my couch until after midnight, scrolling through news sites trying to keep myself alert. Around 1:30 a.m., I started feeling my eyelids get heavy. I forced myself to stay up a bit longer, but by 2:00 a.m., I couldn't fight it. My body felt exhausted. My head started to nod. I gave up and went to bed. I set the camera to record again. I woke up at 7 a.m. My mouth was dry. The first thing I did was check the glass, half empty. I felt a rush of heat spread across my face. I looked over at the camera and saw the little red light. It was still recording. I turned it off. My heart rate was high as I sat down at my desk. I pressed play. At 2:47 a.m., I could see myself. I was lying on my side, and then I flipped onto my back. My eyes opened. I sat up slowly, like before. I picked up the glass. I whispered something I couldn't hear, then extended my arm. This time, I noticed something weird on the left side of the frame. There was a flicker. It was small and faint, like static or a glitch. It lasted less than a second. Then the footage jumped again to 2:48 a.m. I was lying down, with half the water gone. It's hard to describe the way my body felt watching that. My throat went dry and I kept swallowing. I was sweating under my arms. I had goosebumps on my forearms. I was alone, and yet I was interacting with something I couldn't see. There was no one else in the room, but I was giving water to something. I tried to replicate the glitch later by moving the camera around and messing with the memory card. Nothing explained why it cut out specifically at those moments. I considered the possibility of an electrical interference, but I couldn't find a pattern. The camera was brand new. The memory card was fine. The only times it cut were the times I was offering water. I started sleeping with the light on. It didn't change anything. The glass still ended up half empty. The camera still caught me sitting up and extending that glass. I thought about throwing the glass away or not leaving any water at all, but part of me wanted to keep observing. Maybe I was searching for an explanation, even if it scared me. One night, I tried sleeping in a different room. I brought the camera with me and placed a full glass of water on the new nightstand. I locked every window. I closed the door. I made sure there was no way someone could sneak in. But the same thing happened. I woke up, half the water gone, no spill, no sign of where it went. The footage was the same. Me, sitting up, offering the glass to thin air, glitch, then me lying down again. Over the next few days, I felt my nerves fraying. I jumped at small sounds. I kept checking over my shoulder. I couldn't concentrate on my routine. My eyes were ringed with dark circles. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was right there with me at night, something only I could perceive in that strange, half-awake state. My hands were unsteady, and I kept clenching them into fists. My neck felt stiff, and my shoulders ached from constant tension. A week later, I decided to confront myself on camera. I recorded a message to play on my phone at night, something that would speak directly to me if I was sleepwalking. It said, "Hey, you're asleep right now. Put the glass down. There's nobody there." I set the audio to play on a loop at 200 a.m. through a small speaker. My plan was to see if that broke the pattern. That night, I placed the glass on the nightstand, set the camera, and climbed into bed. I felt my heart pounding against my rib cage. Around 2 a.m., I heard my own recorded voice talking. It woke me up slightly, but I drifted back to sleep. In the morning, the glass was still half empty. The footage showed me sitting up around 2:06 a.m., ignoring my own recorded voice and offering the glass again. The same glitch, the same cut, the same result. I felt drained. My body was sore and my head was pounding from lack of quality sleep. I decided to watch the most recent recording in slow motion. I combed through every frame leading up to the glitch. Right before the footage froze, I noticed my hand was tilted. The water was pouring into empty space, yet it didn't spill onto my sheets. It just vanished, as if it was being consumed by something unseen. That image of the water disappearing into thin air made my skin crawl. I'm still living in this apartment. I still sleep in that room. Every night I tell myself it's probably just me with a weird sleepwalking habit and a faulty camera. But that doesn't explain the water vanishing or the sugar test. My arms still feel shaky when I get ready for bed. I leave the camera off now because watching that footage was messing with my mind. But I keep the glass there, almost like I'm testing whether it'll still happen. And it does. Every morning I wake up and check the glass. It's always half empty. There's no residue, no sign of a spill. I try to move on with my day, but there's a little knot in my stomach whenever I think about it. Sometimes my shoulders tense up. Sometimes I feel a rush of blood in my ears. I don't have answers. I only have those recordings that show me offering water to something I can't see, then a glitch, then half the water is gone. I'm not sure how to make it stop. I'm not sure I even can. All I know is that I'm the only one in the room. I'm the only one on camera, but I'm not alone in that moment. Something is taking that water and I'm the one giving it away. And that scares me in a way I can't fully explain. I just feel it in my bones every time I wake up and see that half-empty glass. It's still happening, night after night with no end in sight. I got this job as a janitor at the old Brickfield school about a year ago. On my first week, I noticed a heavy atmosphere in certain hallways, but I shrugged it off. I needed the paycheck, and I don't scare easily. That was my mindset. Then things started to happen at night. I usually start my shift around 3 in the afternoon. I handle cleaning tasks while daytime staff and students are still around. It's not a complicated routine. Sweep, mop, empty trash, wipe down tables. The building is large though, with 2 main floors and 1 underground level that's been sealed off for years. Most people here don't talk about the basement area. They say it's off limits for safety reasons. I never questioned it until I started hearing strange sounds echoing from somewhere below. I first heard it about a month after I started. It was past 9 at night. I was making a final round, checking doors and windows. The hallways were empty. The lights were dim. My footsteps echoed on the polished floors. That's when I picked up on some kind of muffled laughter in the distance. It was soft, but it carried along the corridor. I stopped, listened, and tried to pinpoint the direction. It seemed to come from the stairwell that leads down to the basement. My stomach tightened. My heartbeat sped up a little, but I tried to stay calm. I took a few breaths and told myself it was just some leftover recording from a classroom upstairs, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me. The next couple of nights, it happened again. Always around the same time, always drifting up from that stairwell. Some quiet laughter, followed by a shuffle of movement. It never lasted more than a few seconds, so I couldn't confirm anything. One night I decided to investigate. I stood by the door leading down to the basement. The door was locked as usual. I listened, pressing my ear against the wood. I heard nothing at first. I was about to turn away when a short burst of laughter made me jerk back. It wasn't loud. It was just unexpected. I actually jumped. My hands felt clammy and I swallowed hard. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I tried to open the door, but there was a security chain and an extra padlock. The basement area had an official sign over it that said, "Authorized personnel only." Still, I felt like I should at least check. It seemed odd to have any noises coming from a place that was supposed to be empty. But the padlock was secure, and I didn't have a key for it. I made a note to mention it to the principal the next day. The following morning, I went to the principal's office and told him what I'd heard. He looked tired when I brought it up. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. He said something about old rumors from decades ago, about unusual occurrences in that basement, but he told me not to worry about it. He said that area had been sealed for a long time, and that the locks were just to keep random people from wandering down there and getting hurt. I nodded and left it at that, but his reaction stuck with me. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed resigned, like he expected my questions eventually. I kept working the rest of that day as usual. I vacuumed rugs, cleaned chalk trays in the older classrooms, and took out the trash. But every time I passed the hallway leading down to that sealed door, I felt a pull. It bugged me. That night, after everyone left, I tried to ignore the urge to stand there and wait for the laughter. Instead, I went about my normal chores, finishing everything by 9:30. By the time I was done, I still felt tense and unsettled, so I walked down that hallway again. My footsteps echoed in the stillness. The overhead lights flickered a bit. I stopped in front of the basement door. Silence at first, then a sound like light footsteps on concrete. I couldn't see anything, but I felt a chill under my skin. The tiny hairs on my arms stood up. My throat went dry and I thought about calling out, but something kept me quiet. The night after that, I decided to bring a flashlight. The overhead lights in that lower level barely work, or so they say. I opened the main door that leads to the basement stairwell. Not the locked one, but the outer door leading to a short landing. It's always unlocked in case of emergencies, though the actual door to the basement corridor is the locked one. I pulled the heavy door open. The musty smell of old concrete hit me. I felt cobwebs brush my face. The air was stale. I aimed my flashlight around. The steps disappeared into darkness below. I didn't go down. I just stood there listening. My palms were sweating. My mouth felt dry again. My heart was thumping and I felt a clench in my stomach. No laughter this time. I tried to tell myself that was a good sign. Maybe the noise was some kind of ventilation quirk or old pipes rattling. But that laughter had sounded too real. A few days later, I found something that made my hands tremble. I was cleaning the far end of the first floor, near an exit that led to a side yard. Tucked in a dusty corner behind a broken stool was a small rubber ball. It was filthy, covered in grime. I picked it up. I felt an odd jolt. It smelled like old rubber. My mind raced. Why would a ball be sitting in that corner? That part of the building was rarely used. Plus, it was the hallway closest to the basement door. There were old scuff marks on the floor nearby, like it had been kicked around. I stood there holding it, staring at those marks. Then I heard a faint scrape against the floor behind me. My heart jumped. I spun around with the ball in my hand. Nobody was there. The hallway was empty, and the lights hummed overhead. I took the ball to the janitor's closet and wiped it down. It looked worn, but I could still make out some faded lettering. I couldn't read it. It almost looked like it had been left there for decades. That didn't make sense. Normally, old supplies or objects get cleared out during routine renovations. Yet this ball had just shown up. I locked it in my supply cabinet and tried to forget about it. Later, when I asked the principal again if anyone else had found weird items in the basement area over the years, he clammed up. He just told me the place was off limits, that it had been shut down for a long time, and that I should leave it alone. He said if I heard anything, I should ignore it because old buildings make all kinds of noises. He repeated that line several times, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. I left his office feeling uneasy. From that point on, I felt like something was drawing me downstairs. I'd pass the corridor and I'd get a prickling sensation on my neck. Sometimes I heard faint sounds, rustling, maybe footsteps, maybe faint voices. Always quick, always gone in a flash. On some nights, I'd walk the entire building after everyone left. I'd open classroom doors, flick on lights, check behind desks, just to be sure no one was around. Then I'd stand near the basement door, waiting. Sometimes I heard that same distant laugh or some tiny shuffle. Other times it was dead quiet. One night I worked up the nerve to bring a small crowbar in case I decided to pry open that lock. I knew I could get fired if I damaged school property, so I hesitated. Still, the curiosity ate at me. Around 10, after checking all the floors, I headed to the basement entrance. My skin felt hot. My heart hammered. I had the flashlight in one hand and the crowbar in the other. The corridor was silent except for the buzzing of the old fluorescent lights. I set the flashlight on the floor, pointing at the door. My hands shook. I knelt down, inserted the crowbar near the padlock. Right then, a loud bang came from inside the stairwell. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. Another bang, like something hitting the inside of the door from the other side. I grabbed the flashlight and sprang back. My legs felt weak. I stared at the door. The handle didn't move. The lock stayed in place. After a few seconds of standing there, holding my breath, I inched closer again. I pressed my ear to the door. I heard nothing, just my own breathing. My mouth was dry, and my forehead was damp with sweat. I whispered, "Hello? Anyone in there?" No answer. My heart was still racing. My neck felt stiff. I decided not to break the lock. I felt afraid of what I might find if I actually got inside. I hurried back to my closet, locked up my crowbar, and left the building soon after. That night I barely slept. I kept imagining that door slamming open, something running up the stairs. I woke up with my heart pounding more than once. The next day at work, I was jumpy. Every little sound made me look over my shoulder. My coworker, Manny, asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was just tired. He shrugged and went about his business. About a week later, I took another late shift, determined to keep my composure. The building was calm until around 9:30. I was finishing up in the second-floor hallway. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered. They do that sometimes, but this felt more dramatic. It felt like the power was about to cut out completely. The light stabilized, though. I packed up my mop and decided to do one final pass near the basement door. As I approached, I smelled something stale and damp. It was stronger than usual. The hallway felt colder. I turned the corner and the door to the stairwell was ajar. It's never left open because the principal wants it locked. My pulse sped up. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight through the gap. The air inside felt heavy. I called out, "Anyone in here?" My voice echoed. I waited. No response. I took a few steps in, keeping the door in sight. The flashlight beam shook because my hands were unsteady. The walls were rough cement. Paint was peeling. The smell was like old, wet concrete. I heard a faint scrape along the floor further down the stairs. It stopped when I moved the flashlight toward the darkness. I stood there, my stomach knotted. I wanted to go back, but my curiosity got the better of me. I descended a few steps. My ears were straining for any movement. My skin felt cold. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat. Down at the bottom of the stairs, I saw a corridor with a few doors on each side, all closed. The padlock that I usually saw on the main basement door was lying on the ground, broken. My mouth went dry. I swallowed. The corridor had flickering emergency lights, a dull yellowish glow that barely lit the space. Dust coated the floor. I moved forward cautiously. My shoes left prints in the dirt and debris. Each step sounded loud in my ears. I noticed an old sign on the wall, half hanging by a single screw. I aimed the flashlight at it. It just had a room number and a note about storage. The corridor extended maybe 30 or 40 feet, ending in a dead end. I tried the first door on my left. It was locked. The door on my right had a broken lock, so I nudged it open with my foot. The room beyond was full of old desks and chairs stacked in messy piles. My flashlight beam caught layers of dust swirling in the air. The smell made me cough. I listened hard for any noise, but it was dead silent. Then behind me I heard a dull thump. It sounded like something dropping onto the floor. My stomach twisted. I whipped around, pointing the flashlight toward the corridor. Nothing moved, but there was a shadow near the far end. It slid across the wall, then disappeared. I tried to focus on it, but it was gone. My scalp tingled. I backed away into the storage room, keeping the flashlight trained on the corridor. I felt a wave of nausea. My mind was racing. I forced myself to step back into the hallway. I wanted to see if someone was there. My heart pounded against my ribs. I moved forward, calling out, "Hello?" My voice shook. I tried to sound firm, but I couldn't hide the fear. The corridor stayed empty and quiet. I checked the second door on the left, jiggled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard something that made my hair stand on end. A low chuckle. It was brief, maybe a second or two. It echoed, then vanished. I froze. My mind screamed to get out, but my legs felt locked in place. After a moment, I managed to force myself back up the stairs. My chest felt tight. I nearly tripped on the top step. When I reached the main floor, I slammed the door shut and locked it with the chain. I stood there, panting, sweat rolling down my face. I left the building in a rush that night. I didn't even stop to check the rest of the floors. I just grabbed my jacket, clocked out, and walked fast to my car. My hands were shaking as I tried to get the key in the ignition. I drove home, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. I couldn't stop thinking about that broken padlock lying on the basement floor. Since then, I've kept my distance from that place. I still do my job, but I avoid that corridor after dark. I don't want to hear the laughter anymore. I don't want to see shadows move. I asked the principal if we could get more security measures or if someone could go down there with me during the day. He said he'd think about it, but he never brought it up again. Sometimes during my shift, I still catch faint sounds at the edge of hearing, like a short laugh or a quick shuffle. I don't investigate now. I just grip my keys, keep my head down, and hurry past. I haven't told the rest of the staff what I experienced. I'm not even sure what I'd say. I don't have an explanation, and I don't think the principal wants me spreading stories. But I can't ignore what I saw and heard. That place feels wrong. The locked basement still looms in my mind. At night, it's on my mind even when I'm home. Sometimes I dream about standing at the top of those stairs, shining my flashlight, and seeing something waiting at the bottom. It's always just out of sight. I'm still working at Brickfield School for now. The paycheck is steady and I need it, but I don't linger in the hallways after my tasks are done. I clean up, lock up, and get out as fast as I can. I know there's something down there, something that laughs in the dark and opens locked doors without a key. I don't know who or what it is, and I don't want to find out. All I can do is leave that basement alone and hope it leaves me alone in return. I bought the rotary phone at an antique bazaar on a Saturday afternoon. I didn't plan on using it. I just wanted something old-fashioned to fill a corner of my living room. It had a faded beige color and a few scratches on the dial. It felt heavy in my hands, and I remember noticing a slight scent of dust and mildew around it. The seller said it was from the 1960s, but I didn't ask many questions. I thought it would make a good conversation piece when friends came over. I wiped it off at home, set it on a small side table, and forgot about it. I was alone that night, sitting on my couch, flipping through channels. I hadn't even bothered connecting that phone to any line because I didn't have a landline service. Around midnight, I got up to turn off the TV and head to bed. That was when it rang. The rotary phone rang with a loud, mechanical buzz that made the hair on my arms stand up. I felt a wave of disbelief. I stood there, staring at it, trying to figure out if I was hearing things. It kept ringing, steady and clear. My heart started pounding. I thought maybe I was half asleep or dreaming. I stepped closer to the phone. The dial was still and the cord wasn't plugged into anything. I reached out and my hand was trembling. I lifted the heavy handset, pressing it against my ear without thinking about what I would say. I heard static first. Then I heard breathing. It was shallow and raspy, like someone with a throat problem. I said hello. The voice said my name. It said, Daniel. It sounded low and muffled, as if the speaker's mouth was partially covered. I felt my chest tighten because I hadn't told anyone my name. I hadn't even used this phone for calls. I asked who it was. The voice said, We're not done. We have to finish the conversation. I stood there sweating, staring at the blank television screen. My mind was racing. I tried to ask what conversation they meant, but the line went silent. I waited a few seconds, then I heard a faint click. After that, no more sound. I slowly placed the handset back on the cradle. My hands were shaking and my heart was beating so fast that it hurt. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 12:13 a.m. I felt unsettled, but I tried to dismiss it. I tried to convince myself it had been some weird technical glitch. I unplugged the phone's cord from the body, even though there was no phone jack involved. I wrapped the cord around the base, hoping it would stay silent. I went to bed but couldn't sleep much. I kept thinking about the way the caller had said my name. I tried to come up with a rational explanation, but nothing made sense. In the morning, I told myself to forget it. I had coffee, went about my day, and tried not to look at the phone. I felt foolish for letting it get to me. That next night, the phone rang again at exactly the same time, 12:13 a.m. I had turned off the lights in the living room, so the ringing felt louder in the darkness. My chest felt tight right away. I forced myself to answer. I lifted the handset. My voice cracked when I said hello. The same breathing came through, followed by the same rasp. The voice said, Daniel, you remember the house, don't you? I swallowed. I said I didn't know what they were talking about. The voice paused, then said, You left something unfinished. Then it went dead. I put the phone down, switched on all the lights, and stared at it. The phone wasn't connected. The cord was still coiled up around it. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I didn't know what to do. I wanted to get rid of the phone, but I also felt drawn to it. I wanted to know what was going on. I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the time every few minutes, expecting another call. Nothing else happened that night. In the morning, I drove the phone to a nearby dumpster and left it there. I felt an odd sense of relief while driving away. I thought that would be the end of it. But by the time I got home from work, the phone was on my doorstep. It had scuff marks on the side, but it was the same exact phone. I felt my stomach churn. My hands felt cold, and my knees felt unsteady. I stood there staring at it, checking the street. I saw no one around. I picked it up, carried it inside, and set it on the table. I dialed my cell phone to call a friend just to hear another human voice. I told him I was dealing with something weird. I didn't give him all the details. I asked if I could spend the night at his place, but he was out of town. I thanked him anyway and hung up. Then I tried to calm down by turning on some music. I sat at the kitchen table watching the phone in the living room. The day turned into evening and I tried to ignore the weight in my chest. At 12:13 a.m., it rang again. I answered. The voice said, "You can't run from this. We have to finish." I felt anger and fear mixing in my chest. I asked who they were. The voice told me things that felt oddly familiar. Something about an old basement, a wooden chair, a damp floor. But I've never lived in a house with a basement. My apartment building has none of that. I told the voice I had no idea what they meant. The voice sounded angry, saying, "We remember what happened. You owe us." Then a click. Over the next few nights, the phone always rang at 12:13 a.m. I couldn't sleep at all. I could barely eat. My stomach was constantly cramped. My mouth felt dry all the time. I caught myself jumping at every small noise around the apartment. The calls became longer. The voice described events that I never experienced, but each detail made me feel like I was forgetting something crucial. It talked about a musty smell, old boxes, and a sense of dread. My skin would crawl whenever I heard the phone ring. I tried leaving it off the hook. I tried removing the rotary dial. I even tried smashing it with a hammer. But every night at the same time, it would ring again, completely intact. I started hearing faint voices in the background during the calls. It sounded like multiple people whispering. Sometimes I heard tapping as if someone was knocking on a wall. The voice kept insisting we had unfinished business. It mentioned a name, Harold. I don't know any Harold, but something in my mind churned whenever I heard that name. I felt a tight knot in my chest. My breath would catch, and I'd struggle to speak. I'd try to ask for an explanation, but the calls always ended before I got answers. I began dreading midnight. I would watch the clock, feeling sweat gather on my palms. The second it hit 12:13, the phone would ring. The sound was always the same, sharp and mechanical. I tried to throw the phone in the dumpster again, but it reappeared on my kitchen table. I tried burying it in a box under junk in my closet, but at exactly 12:13 it would ring, and I'd have to dig it out to answer. The voice's tone became more urgent. "We're running out of time," it said one night. "If we don't finish, it will start all over again." I kept asking what would start. I never got a direct response. The breathing on the line became more strained. I could feel the tension in my chest building. It felt like a weight pressing down on my lungs. My muscles were tight, and I couldn't relax. After a few days, I noticed that the calls started including bizarre static bursts. I heard sounds that reminded me of clattering metal objects, but I couldn't place what they were. Then one night, the voice told me to look in the phone's base. I realized there were small screws on the bottom. With shaky hands, I flipped the phone over, unscrewed the panel, and found a small compartment hidden inside. There was a crumpled piece of paper. The writing was faded, but I could make out some phrases. "Meet at the basement," "Bring the trunk," and the name Harold written several times. My stomach felt uneasy. My head started throbbing. I had no memory of these words, but something about them felt heavy in my mind. The phone rang again right away, even though it was only 9 p.m. That broke the pattern of 12:13. I picked up, and the voice said, "Do you understand now? You need to open the door. You need to face it." My hands were shaking so much that the handset rattled against my ear. I asked what door they were talking about. The voice said, "Check the closet in the hallway." I walked to my hallway closet, phone still in hand. I looked inside, just coats and a few boxes. Then I noticed the floor looked different. One of the floorboards had a small gap at the edge. I had never seen that gap before. I set the phone down on a nearby shelf, but the line stayed open. I heard the voice breathing. I crouched and pulled on the loose board. It shifted, and I saw a narrow space under the closet floor. It was dark and smelled of damp wood. I reached inside, heart pounding in my throat. I found a small metal key with rust spots on it. I grabbed it. At that exact moment, the line went dead. I put the phone back on the cradle and felt my hands trembling. I had no idea what door this key might open. I walked around my apartment, checking everything. It didn't match any lock. At 12:13 a.m., the phone rang again. My voice shook when I answered. The caller told me to visit an address on the outskirts of town. I recognized the street name, but I had never been there. The voice said, "You have the key. You can finally finish this. If you don't, we'll keep calling." My entire body felt tense. I could feel sweat soaking the back of my shirt. I asked what I was supposed to finish, but the line went silent again. I stood there alone, exhausted. My skin felt clammy, and my mind couldn't focus on anything else. The next evening, I worked up the courage to drive to that address. I tucked the rotary phone in the trunk of my car, unsure why. The drive was about 30 minutes. I kept glancing at the phone in the rearview mirror, expecting it to ring. It stayed quiet. When I arrived, I saw a rundown building with boarded-up windows. There was a side entrance with a rusted lock. I tried the key. It fit. The lock turned, but the door didn't budge at first. I had to throw my shoulder into it. The door opened, revealing a dark corridor. My breathing was unsteady. My heart was pounding so hard that my chest ached. I stood there for a minute, unsure if I should go in, but I remembered the voice saying it wouldn't stop calling. I walked in a few steps. The air was stale and smelled of mold. I aimed my phone's flashlight around. The walls had peeling paint and the floor creaked. I didn't see any basement door right away. I noticed a door to my left with a sign that was too faded to read. I twisted the knob, but it was stuck. I took a few steps farther down the corridor. The floor felt soft in places, like it might cave in. I found a second door, slightly ajar. Inside was a narrow flight of wooden steps leading down. The smell of dampness was stronger there. I started down the steps, each one groaning under my weight. My legs felt weak and my throat was dry. At the bottom, I found a large space that looked like an old storage area. There were dusty shelves and broken crates. In the corner, there was an old trunk. I approached it, noticing fresh scrapes in the dust like someone had moved it recently. I lifted the lid and saw random papers, old clothes, and a rotary phone base without a handset. My hands felt cold. I backed away, uncertain what I was supposed to do. That's when the phone in my trunk started ringing. It sounded muffled from upstairs. My chest tightened, and I rushed back up, following the noise through the corridor and out the door. I opened my car's trunk. The phone was ringing even though it wasn't connected to anything. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The voice said, "Now you see what you left behind. Bring it all out into the open or the calls will never stop." I felt my mouth go dry. I looked back at the building. I had no idea what secrets were hidden there, but I felt a surge of determination. I didn't want to run from this anymore. I walked back inside, carrying the phone like a torch, though it gave me no light. I made my way down to the basement again, the phone silent in my hand. I pulled the trunk into the center of the room, opened it, and laid everything out on the floor. There were letters addressed to someone named Harold, receipts for building materials, and some old photographs of people standing near what looked like the same trunk. None of them looked familiar to me, yet I felt a strange sense of recognition in my gut. I heard a click on the phone, even though I didn't put it to my ear. I lifted the handset. The voice was calmer now. It said, "That's all you needed to do. We won't call again. The door is open." Then the line went silent. I kept waiting for the phone to ring that night, but it didn't. I drove home, carrying the phone in the passenger seat, half expecting it to buzz. It stayed silent. Back at my apartment, I set it on the side table and stared at it. Midnight passed and the phone didn't move. I still felt shaky, but a little lighter. In the following days, I kept the phone in my apartment, waiting for a call that never came. I can't explain it. Maybe those calls came from memories that were never mine. Maybe they belonged to someone else who owned the phone decades ago. All I know is that the phone remains silent. I see it every day, and I still expect it to ring. But so far, it hasn't made a sound.